Okay, so that's the portion we're working on. He gathered, or assembled. All right, we'll just dive right into Exodus 35, and this 35 through 38 is this portion. We're doing a double portion today, so oh man, this thing is going to be probably a longer Bible study than usual. And if anyone else has the Twitch thing pulled up, if you see any questions, feel free to post them in the Twitch chat in Discord so that everyone else can see it as well.
I'm watching for questions.
Perfect. Okay, let me pull up this, and we will start off with the Sabbath regulations.
Do you want to do an introduction first, like where?
Yeah.
Just in case anyone's new, and I'll give like a general overview of where we are because we've done 2 parashas already. So this would be our third. So let me just go. Here we go. So the last couple of parashas, what we've been going through is how the temple and the high priest was being viewed internally within the Torah, and also external sources like Philo, Josephus, and the rabbinic material. And so there's this saying from Simon the Righteous, who was one of the last men of the Great Assembly. He used to say this: the world stands upon 3 things, the Torah, the temple service, and the practice of acts of piety. So there's this idea that performing the actual temple service contributes to the stability of the entire universe. And so when they viewed the temple, they saw it as a microcosm of the entire universe. A microcosm is a small working scale, basically, of what surrounds us. And so you get writers like Philo and Josephus, and when they're talking about the temple and the high priest, they say things like this. So this is going to be Josephus. For if anyone do but consider the fabric of the tabernacle, and take a view of the garments of the high priest, and of those vessels which we make use in our sacred ministrations, he will find that our legislator was a divine man, and that we are unjustly reproached by others. For if anyone do without prejudice and with judgment look upon these things, he will find they were every one made in a way an imitation and representation of the universe. So when so Josephus there, when he's looking at the temple, he's noting that it's a microcosm of the universe. It's made to represent the universe. And similarly, when Philo, who's writing a bit earlier than Josephus in the 1st century, he's talking about the garments of the high priest, he says this: but the high priest is commanded to wear a similar dress when he goes into the Holy of Holies to offer incense, because linen is not made of any animal that dies, as woolen garments are. He is also commanded to wear another robe also, having very beautiful embroidery and ornament upon it, so that it may seem to be a copy and representation of the world. So there you got 2 different writers, and they're both looking at the high priest stroke temple, and they're associating it with cosmic imagery. Different parts of the temple represent different parts of creation. And what we went through in the last 2 parashas is how the 7 sections dealing with the instructions of the tabernacle relate each to a day of creation. And so basically it ties the idea of creation and tabernacle together. And so when we read Genesis 1, when the Most High creates the universe, he's creating his own tabernacle, his own temple. And so this is reflected in the 7 speeches that we see in Exodus chapter 25 to chapter 31. It's divided into 7 speeches. And so each one of those speeches relate to a day of creation, and we went through that in the previous parashah. So we're going to continue on with those types of associations in this parashah, and we'll be going through some of the Jewish sources to demonstrate across the board that this was a very legitimate way to understand and read the Torah, and how the high priest and temple was viewed. So that's the intro.
All right, thank you. All right, moving into Sabbath regulations. Yeah, this one has got a lot of good questions around Sabbath, and I know there's people that are very much on the the laws around Sabbath, what can and can't be done on Sabbath. There's a lot of questions around Sabbath, comments around Sabbath, and even modern where you have the date of Sabbath. But we'll get into this and hopefully answer all those questions as we go along. Sabbath regulations, Exodus 35. Moses assembled all the congregations of the people of Israel and said to them, "These are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. 6 days' work shall be done, but on the seventh day you shall have a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire in all of your dwelling places on the Sabbath day." Do you want to continue through the contributions to the tabernacle, or do you want to?
Yeah, if we
Awesome,
read
that one.
like
Okay.
1 to 20, and we'll kind of go that
Okay.
way in that direction.
Cool. Contributions for the tabernacle. Moses said to all the congregations of the people of Israel, "This is the thing that the Lord has commanded. Take from among you a contribution to the Lord. Whoever is of a generous heart, let him bring the Lord's contribution: gold, silver, and bronze, blue and purple and scarlet yarn, and fine twisted linens, goat hair, tanned rams, skins, and goat skins, acacia wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, and onyx stones and stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece. Let every skillful craftsman among you come down and make all that the Lord has commanded: the tabernacle, its tent and its covering, its hooks and its frames, its bars, its pillars and its bases, the ark with its poles, the mercy seat and the veil of the screen, the table with its poles and all of its utensils, and the bread of the presence, the lampstands also for the light with its utensils and its lamps, and the oil for the light, and the altar of incense, and with its poles and the anointing oil, and the fragrant incense, and the screen for the doors, and the door of the tabernacle, the altar of burnt offerings, and its grating of bronze, its poles, all of its utensils, the basin and its stand, the hanging of the courts, its pillars, its bases, the screens of the gate of the court, the pegs of the tabernacle, the pegs of the court, and their cords, the finely worked garments for ministering in the holy place, the holy garments for Aaron the priest, and the garments of his sons for their service as priests. There.
Okay, there we go. So, in Exodus chapter 25 to 31, we've got a division in the Hebrew text of 7 speeches. And the last speech begins at Exodus chapter 31, verse 12 to Exodus chapter 31, verse 18. And so in this 7th speech of the instructions to build the tabernacle, it deals with the Sabbath. And so what you discover is that after chapter 31, it goes into kind of a narration of issues like the sin of the golden calf, Moses' shining face, and things like that. And so when you get to chapter 35, again, it begins with the idea of the Sabbath. And so what you've got is instructions to build a tabernacle, and then you've got this full scene that we went through in the last parashah, and we noted how the full scene in, like, for instance, the golden calf parallels the full scene, the sin aspect of what happens in the Garden of Eden with Adam. And so basically chapter 35 then picks up the idea of the Sabbath again that we left off in chapter 31. And then it connects the idea of wisdom to the creation of the tabernacle. And you'll see this kind of repeated over and over, that the people who construct the tabernacle are filled with wisdom. You know, what's the function of this? So every wise-hearted among you, it takes wisdom to create the tabernacle, as we've seen in previous sections, as the tabernacle and the clothing of the high priest acts as a microcosm of the universe. When speaking about creation, there are verses which associate wisdom with the construction of the universe. So this is, for instance, I'm going to cite 3 places. This is Psalms 136, verse 5. To him who by wisdom made the heavens, for his mercy endures forever. This is Psalms 104:24. O Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, how many are your works? You have made all of them in wisdom. The earth is full of your riches. And finally, Proverbs 3:19. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh founded the earth by wisdom. He founded the heavens by understanding. So there you got three texts, and they're talking about creation and the formation and creating of creation itself, and they're associating it with wisdom. And so what you see in Exodus 35 is this concentration on wisdom, and you're also going to see the phrase "Spirit of God" also employed when it comes to Bezalel as well, about the construction of the temple. And we meet the Spirit of God in Genesis chapter 1 at creation. So these are little indicators that wisdom is being associated with all of creation in Genesis chapter 1. And so you need the wisdom to build the tabernacle, because the tabernacle is, for all intents and purposes, a microcosm of all creation. So if you think about when Solomon also built the temple, Solomon prays for wisdom, and he's granted wisdom. And then what does he do? He builds a temple. So even in the account of Solomon, the building of a temple is connected to the idea of wisdom. And as we've seen with the three texts I read out, creation itself is linked to being created through wisdom. And so you're going to see this repeated emphasis on the kind of wisdom of the various artisans who create and form the various different parts of the tabernacle, etc., because they're all participating in a very divine action. The Most High at creation uses his wisdom to create the various elements of creation. And this is going to be reflected when it comes to the tabernacle account. The various artisans, the various constructors of the tabernacle use their wisdom to create another universe. Anyway, that's my comments.
Nice. Any other comments or questions or anything like that? Insults?
I hate Naz's voice. It's terrible.
Good. All right. So we're all caught up then. Yeah, I think it's interesting because everything has already been talked about. Like, these are all the things that you're supposed to build, but then once again he's going through and I don't know, just the meaning behind everything is to why even repeat everything that you have to build, knowing that these are the things that you're already commanded to build. But then just going through everything, like every little detail, like it just becomes, it's almost repetitive. But I wonder what the meaning of the repetitiveness is, like why.
Well, this is a good insight, because when you think about what you just said, think about the construction of the ark with Noah in the story of Noah. There's a lot of emphasis on what Noah had to do and the various different elements, how to construct an ark and so forth like this. Why have we got all of that detail there? What's significant about that? Well, when you compare the instructions given to Noah to, for instance, the instructions to build the tabernacle, and also the kind of instructions that you see to build, or the description of the temple that Solomon builds, there seems to be some kind of comparison that's going on. And so when it comes to Noah and the ark, what you'll discover is that it actually has three levels, and the temple has three main sections. And so basically the ark is being modeled after a temple. And if you notice in the story of the ark, it rests on a mountain at the end of the story. And so in later texts, what you see is the mountain presented on the ark or the temple mounted on a temple, or a mountain. And so again, you've got this kind of parallel between the ark, mountain, temple, mountain that's going on, which would place Noah in a kind of in a priestly context. And so you're going to see parallels there. And even when it comes to the dates that you see in the story of Noah and the ark, that they're going to play into the Exodus construction of the tabernacle. We'll see that I believe in chapter 40, where it mentions a very specific date. And the reason why it mentions a very specific date is because we've already got precedent within the story of Noah for this date. And so again, the idea of raising up a tabernacle is in parallel to what we see in the story of Noah.
I saw the I don't know where I saw it, might have been Rashi or something, but yeah, the similarities in the ark and the temple, and yeah, how you have Noah acting as almost like a high priest in that situation as well. Um, the other comment that I had on this was for Sabbath regulation. Now we know, like, throughout the rest of the text, you know, no work is permitted on the Sabbath. Yet here in Exodus 35, we then have one single task that is actually separated out, being that whoever does any work shall be put to death, and then says, "You shall kindle no fire in your dwelling places." Almost like this is a single task that it's been singled out specifically, um, for some reason, and it's one of those things where it seems out of place, and so to call it out, to think about, and I know that there's been multiple commentaries on that, and the four that I've seen thus far have been, that people were kindling fire, after knowing what the law was of no work. They were still kindling fire because they did not see that as a serious offense or a serious work. The other one is that a simple task, even something as easy as kindling a fire, is not allowed. The third one being, it was to inform us that while cooking for festivals and other like holy days and things were permitted, on the Sabbath it was not permitted. And then the last one is, which was more of the Sadducees view and the Karaite view, which is fire is necessary for life, but on the Sabbath it's not allowed and it shouldn't be enjoyed or anything. Like, you are supposed to, I guess almost like a afflicting the soul kind of a thing. But yeah, just pointing that one out.
If I may, there's actually Rashi commentary on Exodus 35:3, which specifically talks about why the kindling of the fire is seemingly set apart from everything else. Um, and there are some Rebbe who would say that the law about kindling fire is singled out in order to constitute it as a mere negative command, thus indicating that, like all the other negative commands, its infringement is punishable by lashes, but does not make the offender liable to death, um, as does the doing of various other work on Shabbos. But there are others that say that it was singled out in order to separate the various kinds of work comprised, indicating that each transgression of Shabbos law is to be atoned for separately if several of them have been committed at the same time under the same circumstances. And these sources come from Shabbat 70a, Yevamot 6b, Sanhedrin 35b, and Pesachim 5b.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. But yeah, it's very interesting that one is singled out, separately. Yeah.
But I want to ask a question because I don't know the answer to this. But what about the fire for the tabernacle?
The candle, like the eternal flame thing.
Yeah, and then also for the burnt offerings and stuff like that. These are all permitted.
Yeah. So it's strange, isn't it? When you think about this, when you think about the Sabbath, the priests actually do more work on the Sabbath, right? And
Right.
so when you come to when you come into the idea of sacred space, it's like they've got a free pass, so to speak, to perform the work of the service of the tabernacle and so forth like this. And so when it comes to sacred space and priesthood, the rules are different. And so obviously they have to keep the fire going. They have to continually make the offerings and so forth like this. and so that does need to be thought through a bit more. What makes the sacred space different, and why can you do those types of things, but why cannot you do those things outside of that sacred space? What's the difference there? So that type of question is a really good question.
Moving along. Let me pull up the next part. Okay. Then all the congregation of the people of Israel departed from the presence of Moses, and they came, everyone whose heart stirred him, and everyone whose spirit moved him, and brought the Lord's contribution to be used for the tent of meeting, and for all of its service, and for the holy garments. So they came, both men and women. All who were of a willing heart brought brooches and earrings and signet rings and armlets, all sorts of gold objects. Every man dedicated an offering of gold to the Lord, and everyone who possessed blue or purple or scarlet yarns or fine linens or goat's hair or tanned ram skins or goat skins brought them. Everyone who could make a contribution of silver or bronze brought it as the Lord's contribution, and everyone who possessed any acacia wood of any use in the work brought it. And every skillful woman spun with her hands, and they all brought what they had spun in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. And all the women whose hearts stirred them to use their skill. Wow, this is a tongue twister. All the women whose hearts stirred them to use their skill spun the goat's hair, and the leaders brought onyx stones and stones to be set for the ephod and for the breastpiece, and spices and oil for the light, for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense. All the men and women, the people of Israel, whose hearts moved them to bring anything for the work that the Lord had commanded by Moses to be done, brought it as a freewill offering to the Lord. And we do have a question from the chat as well. Skilled with Avocado was asking, would all the colored cloth be from Egypt?
It's a very good question. I wouldn't see any problem in that. I mean, that they pillaged Egypt as they went out, right? So obviously they must be getting this material from somewhere. They're in the desert, they're in the wilderness, and so obviously these types of materials probably weren't so accessible at that point. So I think it's reasonable to say they could have bought it from Egypt. They could have acquired it in Egypt and brought it out with them, or they could have taken it from the Egyptians. The text doesn't say specifically where they're sourcing these particular materials from in all cases, but I think it's a reasonable kind of assumption to make.
Would it be an assumption to make that they could have harvested some of these things, like the yarns, for instance, from maybe their own flock that they had at the time? I'm assuming they would have to have some sort of flock that with them during their exodus.
Yeah, they, the text says they have flocks and so forth like this. So they may be sourcing it from, from the flocks from Egypt, from what they have. Because
it seems like they have the skills, the people to do it with.
Yeah.
So either way, yeah, I don't know if there's any commentary on that. I haven't seen anything anyway, at least not in the 5 different versions that I've been reading this week. But yeah, I think that it's reasonable to assume that it would even be a mix of sorts as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you want me to continue on through, I guess, up to 36?
Well, I've got some commentary if you want me to.
Sure.
Sure. So when it comes to, there's a principle in the creation account in Genesis 1 that involves a separation and construction and filling principle. So this is where one day has its own counterpart within the creation account. So the correlation goes like this. Day 1 corresponds to day 4. Day 2 corresponds to day 5. Day 3 corresponds to day 6. And what you're going to see within these correspondences is a forming and filling relationship between all of these days. So, for instance, when we think about day one, in day one, you've got the separation of light and darkness. And so this is your forming of light and darkness, your separation. And so this is filled when you get to day 4. In day 4, you get the creation of the luminaries, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and this fills the expanse. So you've got this forming of the light and then filling of the expanse with the luminaries. So in day 2 of creation, what you see is the separation of waters from waters. So waters above, waters below. And in day 5, you get the fish go in the below waters and the birds go up in the air. So you've got a filling of both up above and down below. And in day 3, you get the separation of the waters and then the appearance of the dry ground. And then the dry ground is filled with man and beast in day 6. So each day has its own counterpart within the creation narrative. And what ultimately this tracks back to is verse 2 of Genesis. The earth become tohu vavohu, formless and void. And so the first 3 days of creation bring form to that which is formless, and the last 3 days of creation fill that which is void. So it really reverses verse 2, tohu vavohu, formless and void, and then obviously you've got the various different elements which kind of reverse that situation. And this type of principle is even seen in the creation of Adam, for instance. If you think about the creation of Adam, he's formed from the dust, and then he has the breath of life breathed into him. So you've got this forming and filling relationship even within the creation story of Adam. And so basically, again, he's mimicking creation. And so Adam is intrinsically linked to creation because he's mimicking creation. And so this principle is used with the high priest. Because the high priest, the various different elements of his garments represent different parts of creation. And so to look at the high priest is to look at the creation itself. And basically he's mimicking what you see with Adam being associated with all of creation. Because when Adam fell, he didn't just affect mankind, he affected all creation. And you can see that, for instance, like in Romans chapter 8, where creation is travailing and groaning until the revealing of the sons, right? All of creation is in a state of decay because of the actions of one. And so it now you have this also association with the high priest in that his actions contribute to the stability of the entire universe through what he does. And so again, it's very Adamic kind of a principle behind the idea of a high priest. And how he can affect all of creation and so forth like this. And that's going to have repercussions for our understanding of the Messiah and how he's a high priest and how he can atone for all of creation. Because now he represents all of creation. And it's like the saying, one died, he died, and we all died. How can that be? And we'll get into that later on. But that's the end of my comments.
All right, I'm gonna read. No, it's past 2:30 here, but I'm gonna read this last, I guess, section, and then I'll hand it over to Dean to do the rest of the readings. Let me adjust something real quick. Okay, we're good. All right, so this is we're at construction of the tabernacle. Let's see. How far do you want me to read down on this one?
So I'm at Exodus chapter 30, verses 30 to 35.
Okay, so just on this one. Okay, then Moses said to the people of Israel, "See, the Lord has called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, son of the tribe of Judah, and he has filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, with intelligence, with knowledge, with all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood for work in every skilled craft. And he has inspired him to teach, both him and Oholiab, the son of Hishmach, of the tribe of Dan. He has filled them with the skill to do every sort of work done by an engraver, or by a designer, or by an embroiderer, in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twisted linen, or by a weaver, by any sort of workman or skilled designer.
Yes. So there we got the phrase Spirit of God, and we meet the Spirit of God in Genesis 1. So Bezalel is filled with the Spirit to construct the various elements of the tabernacle. So again, he's being placed in the role of the creator at creation. So he's mimicking the divine there. And you're going to see this also later on with Moses as well. The Hebrew is going to be very reflective of statements that we see in Genesis 1/2. Where the Most High is at creation, he presides over creation and he blesses creation, for instance, and sanctifies and sees that the work is finished and stuff like this. And you're going to see parallels after the construction of the tabernacle with Moses, right? And this would make sense, right? Because if the tabernacle is a representation of the entire universe and you've just constructed a universe, now you've got Genesis context. And so Moses is going to play out the role of the Most High Creator when they establish and raise up the tabernacle. So these are little indicators to the audience to think back to Genesis 1-3 and associate the tabernacle with creation itself. And that's my comments.
I kind of like how we know that one of the two is filled with the Spirit of God. There's no question before.
Well, you need wisdom to construct these things, right? So, there's going to be a special emphasis there on the Spirit and so forth like this.
Okay.
So, question here. So we have Moses said to the people of Israel, "The Lord is called Bezalel, has called him and filled him with the Spirit of God." And then it says, "And he has inspired him to teach both him and Oholiab." He has inspired him to teach. Is this, who's the he in this that's being referenced?
So let's read the verses. Okay. And he has put on his heart. I think that might be Bezalel.
Because it's Bezalel teaching, and then says both him and Oholiab, the son of. Is inspired him to teach? And then is it saying that both Bezalel and Oholiab are inspired to teach?
Yeah, I think within the narrative, I think that's Bezalel.
Okay.
The he there is. Hang on, I'll just check to see if.
The he there is who, and it is a third person masculine singular, but following Aholiab bin Ahisamach, and then it's talking about him and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan. And again, going back to wisdom, Meleh Otam Hakamat, with the wisdom. He has filled him with the wisdom, which just piggybacks off of what Naz was saying earlier about how this is not just regular wisdom, this is divinely inspired.
Okay, so Oholiab was also fully inspired as well.
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering if it was if it was
that's
passed
unique.
down from Bezalel to Oholiab, and then both of them went to teach. Or
yeah, the key there is that whoever's constructing the tabernacle, they have the wisdom to create and form the various elements of the tabernacle, right? So the central idea there is that when you look at when you remember the text that I read out, how about creation itself is identified with being created through wisdom of the Most High. It makes complete sense as to why now you've got this emphasis on these individuals who are constructing the tabernacle to have this type of wisdom. It's because they're participating in the divine action, and they're mimicking the Most High at creation. And so it would make sense that they're filled with the spirit of wisdom, and then they have the ability then to construct a microcosm of the universe.
So we have a comment in the feed from Andrew. He says, "It is useful, I think, to consider the bigger picture types. The Hebrews came out of Egypt, the world." I think he's referencing to. Not too sure exactly where he's referencing. Actually,
Hebrews came out of Egypt, being the world, being like set up. They were set apart. I think is like that kind of terminology.
Yeah. The entire journey of them coming out of Egypt is more or less them, establishing themselves as following the covenant of Adonai. Um, that's why they're doing all these things and returning to their homeland and constructing the tabernacle, and because this is all divinely inspired by Elohim, and they're beginning to set themselves apart from the various other tribes in the area.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I could say about the Exodus and how it's built on the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. If you very briefly, if you think about the story of Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah, so the basic narrative is this: Hagar, the Egyptian, is given into the hand of Sarah, the Hebrew. Sarah, the Hebrew, afflicts Hagar, the Egyptian. Hagar, the Egyptian, flees into the wilderness. If you take that story, that's the story of the Exodus. You just switch it around. For instance, Egypt would usurp the role of Sarah, and that would push Israel into the role of Hagar. And so the Egyptians afflict Israel, and then Israel flees into the wilderness. And if you notice, one of the first locations that they go to is Shur, and that's the exact location that Hagar flees to. So there's parallels going on between the story of Hagar, Sarah, and Abraham to the Exodus story itself. And if you notice at the very beginning of Exodus, what are the children of Israel doing? They're building the places for Pharaoh. So they're building up Egypt. And that was the role of Hagar in the story that we see in Genesis. Hagar was brought in to build up Sarah. And so again, you've got this kind of play going on where you've got different figures playing the different roles, but it's essentially the story of Hagar, Abraham, and Sarah that's being outworked.
do you guys like etymology?
Yes.
So I'm kind of like reading into the names of Oholiab, if that's how you pronounce it,
Mhm.
and Bezalel.
I did see
Uh,
something on that with one of the names possibly being a name given to him afterward.
Well, Bezalel is under the protection of Hashem. El being Elohim, and Beza is stemming from the root of like a shadow or something that broods over top of something else.
and he's given the role to be the architect of the tabernacle, right?
Yes, and then Aholiab, who came from the tribe of Dan, his name is literally the tent of the Father. Ab, being short for Abba, meaning father, and the root for the word for tent being the beginning of his name. Ohel is tent.
So I'll be taking over. I don't know if we're done with comments or if anybody else has comments.
I've got some more, but I think they're for. I'll wait until the end of the Exodus portion, and then I'll chime in with all my Greek mythology stuff. So, but yeah. If you want to take over, I'm gonna go on mute for a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have fun. I believe we're on 36:1, right?
Yes. So verse 1 to 7.
Cool. So Bezalel and Oholiab, and every craftsman in whom the Lord has put skill and intelligence to know how to do any work in the construction of the sanctuary, shall work in accordance with all that the Lord has commanded. And Moses called Bezalel and Oholiab, and every craftsman in whose mind the Lord has put skill, everyone whose heart stirred him up to come to do the work. And they received from Moses all the contribution that the people of Israel had brought for doing the work on the sanctuary. They still kept bringing him free will offerings every morning, so that all the craftsmen who were doing every sort of task on the sanctuary came, each from the task that he was doing, and said to Moses, "The people bring much more than enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do." So Moses gave command, and word was proclaimed throughout the camp, "Let no man or woman do anything more for the contribution for the sanctuary." So the people were restrained from bringing, for the material they had was sufficient to do all work, and more.
Yeah, so these are my comments. Again, there is a strong emphasis on wisdom used in relation to the construction of the tabernacle. It's a communal action which unites the community with a common goal. Thus, everyone is invited to participate in building a restored universe and mimic the divine. Both male and female participate. The Hebrew word for heavens is masculine, and the Hebrew word for earth is feminine. What then we see in Genesis 1:1 is the joining together of all creation, that which is above and that which is below, that which is masculine and that which is feminine. The formation of Adam later mimics this pattern. He's taken from the dust, that which is below, and has the breath of life breathed into him, something which comes from above. So what you see then with the formation of Adam is that out of Adam's side comes Eve. And the Hebrew word there for side is a term that you see employed in the tabernacle, account for the sides of the tabernacle. So then Eve is then brought to Adam, and it's mimicking the unification of the masculine and feminine, in that Adam and Eve would then become one, just as the heavens and the earth are joined together. And you'll see this in the tabernacle account where the tabernacle is considered to be one, it's unified. And so you've got this kind of unification idea that's going on in the tabernacle. And the basic idea of that is that the heavens and the earth are conjoined together. This is the place where the heavens and the earth mesh and come together. And that's why it's a very dangerous place. That's why you need offerings and so forth like this, because it's sacred space. And this is where you meet the divine. So basically, Adam sums up all of creation. He's intrinsically linked to all creation. And when he sins, all creation begins to decay with him. And that kind of sets the scenes for how creation itself is awaiting the day that mortality is going to be swallowed up by immortality, when the children of the resurrection are going to be revealed. And so basically what you're seeing in the temple stroke tabernacle is the audience kind of a view about, how was the temple being understood in the first century, and can that impact our reading of, for instance, the Gospel of Mark. So in Mark chapter 1 verse 10, it says this: "And going up from the water, immediately he saw the heavens being torn, and the Spirit coming down as a dove upon him." So the Gospel of Mark here is the only gospel that says that at the baptism or immersion of the Messiah, the heavens were torn. And so this is very provocative imagery. And so within the Gospel of Mark, this particular term for torn is only used twice. It's used in Mark chapter 1 verse 10, but it's also used in Mark chapter 15 verse 38. And so chapter 15 verse 38 says this: "And the veil of the holy place was torn into two from top to bottom." So there seems to be some type of symmetry between chapters 1 to chapter 15 in the Gospel of Mark. And there's also other symmetrical pieces that would link the two chapters together. For instance, there's a declaration that the Messiah is the Son, and other things. And so when we think about the veil that was torn in Mark chapter 15, there's two options. So the first option is the inner veil. However, there was two veils in the first century, and there was an outer veil, and it was quite large. And Josephus actually talks about it. And so I'm going to read from Josephus, and he's going to detail what this outer veil looks like. "But before these doors was a veil of equal size with the doors. It was a Babylonian curtain embroidered with blue and fine linen and scarlet and purple, and of a texture that was truly wonderful. Nor was this mixture of colours without its mystical interpretation, but was a kind of image of the universe." So there, when Josephus is talking about the outer veil of the temple in the first century, he says that there is this picture of the universe embroidered on it. And so we've got this kind of tearing of the heavens in Mark chapter 1 at the immersion scene. And so if we track the imagery that Josephus is giving us there could be additional symmetry there, because if that veil is the outer veil that Mark is talking about, then you've got a tearing of the heavens in Mark chapter 15, and you've got a tearing of the heavens in Mark chapter 1. And so basically, in that type of context, the death of the Messiah is being associated with a kind of like a cosmic calamity, so to speak, or some kind of fundamental connection to the universe. When he dies, things happen in the universe. And you can also see this with the rocks that tear apart as well when he dies in like, for instance, Matthew chapter 27 verse 51. So you got this kind of like imagery being associated with the Messiah. And if the Messiah is in a high priestly context, and if the high priest was being understood to be a microcosm of the universe, hopefully you can begin to kind of appreciate the type of associations that are now going on. His death affects all of creation. And so when you get to like text like Ephesians 1:10, it says this: "In regard to the dispensation of the fullness of the times, to bring into one the whole in the Messiah, both the things in the heavens and the things upon the earth in him." And so it's pointing to the heavens and it's pointing to the earth, and these things are being reconciled in him. And so this is like a high priestly category, right? Because the heavens and the earth are represented by the priestly garments. And again in Colossians, it says this: "For all things were created in him, the things in the heavens and the things on the earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or lordships or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him." So again, this is very exalted language. But if you understood how the high priest was being viewed, this can account for this very, very exalted language, because these are basically high priestly markers that would be identified with the high priest. And because the Messiah is now associated with all creation, because he's the high priest, he can now bring redemption to all of creation. And we're going to go into that a bit more, how that logic works. Anyway, that's the end of my comments.
Any other comments, questions? Questions?
Insults.
Do we have any, there's so many numbers involved. Do we have any answers to why these numbers and why is it made that way? Or is it kind of like the arc where it's made specifically to have it such a structurally sound tent?
Yeah, so you get different ideas. Like there's some opinions that the specific numbering may relate to like things like a calendar, because of the way that things are kind of like described. When Philo's talking about the various different elements of the temple stroke tabernacle, he identifies the number 50 with like the Jubilee period. So I think that these things are obviously intentional and they do represent something, but unfortunately we don't have all of the data when it comes to how was the the nitty-gritty details, how was that really understood, if that makes sense.
Should we move on?
Yep.
Okay. Verse 22,
20:38.
38. Then he made the upright frames for the tabernacle of acacia wood. 10 cubits was the length of a frame, and a cubit and a half the breadth of each frame. Each frame had 2 tenons for fitting together. He did this for all the frames of the tabernacle. The frames for the tabernacle he made thus: 20 frames for the south side, and he made 40 bases of silver under the 20 frames, 2 bases under one frame for its 2 tenons, and 2 bases under the next frame for its 2 tenons. For the second side of the tabernacle, on the north side, he made 20 frames, and their 40 bases of silver, 2 bases under one frame, and 2 bases under the next frame. For the rear of the tabernacle westward, he made 6 frames. He made 2 frames for corners of the tabernacle in the rear, and they were separate beneath but joined at the top, at the first ring. He made 2 of them this way for the 2 corners. There were 8 frames with their bases of silver, 16 bases, under every frame 2 bases. He made bars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames of the one side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the tabernacle at the rear westward. And he made the middle bar to run from end to end halfway up the frames. And he overlaid the frames with gold, and made their rings of gold for holders for the bars, and overlaid the bars with gold. He made the veil of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, with cherubim skillfully worked into it. He made it. And for it he made 4 pillars of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold. Their hooks were of gold, and he cast for them 4 bases of silver. He also made a screen for the entrance of the tent, of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, embroidered with needlework, and its 5 pillars with their hooks. He overlaid their capitals, and their fillets were of gold, but their 5 bases were of bronze. So, I have a question, and I think another person has a question with the same question. Why the 5 frames and why the 5 pillars in the front?
I have this question.
This is a very good question, and this is very difficult to answer.
Yeah, apparently nobody knows.
Philo does take a shot at it. But I don't know of any other sources that really take kind of a shot at kind of answering, why 5 here? Is it to indicate some type of division?
Mhm.
But I don't have a concrete answer. Anyone else?
I would be throwing darts in the dark, just throwing my own thoughts into it, and it'd be opinionated. But that's me, and I don't want to throw that out there and cause confusion.
Here's my approach. I kind of go where the data leads me. So if I run out of data, I kind of stop.
Yeah.
So I don't paper over the cracks and build an edifice. And so I kind of refrain in this type of situation. So here's my comments in the section that's just been read out. So you've got these concentration on sides, right? And again, we're going to track back to Genesis chapter 2 when Eve was taken out of the side of man. And so that can tell us two things at the very least. Number one, Adam's body is being associated with the tabernacle. Number two, Eve is also being associated with the tabernacle. Because it's an architectural term. We've got this association with the word side, and it's employed in the tabernacle instructions. The rabbinic material also pick up on this type of association. So you have text like, for instance, Midrash Rabbah Genesis chapter 17 verse 6, and it makes the same type of association. For instance, chapter 17 verse 6 says this, and he took one of his ribs. R. Samuel B. Nachmani said, he took one of his sides, as you read, and for the second side of the tabernacle on the north side. So basically, in that text, the rabbinic source is associating the formation of Eve with the side of the tabernacle. And so this idea of side is really exclusively used in the Torah, at least, for the tabernacle. So there does seem to be, I would say, some kind of connection that's going on there. Elsewhere, it is used more in more variant ways, but primarily it's to do with the sides of the tabernacle in the Torah. Any other comments?
You mentioned Mark earlier. Do you happen to have that Mark reference, that verses?
Sure. It's also in the Parashah document. I don't, if just in case the audience are wondering, we're working off a Parashah document. So all of the majority of the references I'll be talking about should be in the Parashah document. So the two references are Mark chapter 15 verse 38. That's got the Greek word for torn in, which is also used in Mark chapter 1 verse 10. So Mark chapter 1 verse 10 and Mark chapter 15 verse 38. And that will have the two references to the word torn in the Greek.
Yeah. I don't have any comments. Anybody have questions?
If not, Exodus chapter 36 verses
37?
Exodus 37 verses 1 to 16. There we go.
So we're at the making of the ark, chapter 37, verse 1. It says, Bezalel made the ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half was its length, a cubit and a half its breadth, and a cubit and a half its height. And he overlaid it with pure gold inside and outside, and made a molding of gold around it. And he cast for it 4 rings of gold for its 4 feet. 2 rings on its one side and 2 rings on its other side. And he made poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold, and put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark. And he made a mercy seat of pure gold. 2 cubits and a half was its length, and a cubit and a half its breadth. And he made 2 cherubim of gold. He made them of hammered work on the 2 ends of the mercy seat, 1 cherub on the one end, and 1 cherub on the other end. Of one piece with the mercy seat, he made the cherubim on its 2 ends. The cherubim spread out their wings above, overshadowing the mercy seat with their wings, with their faces one to another. Toward the mercy seat were the faces of the cherubim.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Hello, Andrew.
Yes, my name's Andrew.
Welcome.
At last,
Hi,
I found the
Andrew.
way to
Welcome.
join you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm a long way behind in the discussion, but I was speaking generally earlier about the great type between coming out of Egypt as a type of coming out of the world. The basis of you asked where was that based on? That's based on 1 Corinthians 10.
Ah, okay. Cool.
But my sort of reason for saying that was that when you think about the tabernacle, all of the tabernacle was built out of the things that the children of Israel gave as a free will gift offering. So most of these things came out of Egypt, as far as we can see, although we can't be absolutely certain. But the point is, it seems to me that when we are building a sort of a place for God to dwell in our hearts, or to dwell in us or amongst his people, that is achieved by us surrendering freely our God-given abilities, which we have in the world, so to speak. But then these are taken by God and manipulated by his spirit word and transformed into that which is sort of religious or holiness, in terms of becoming the tabernacle.
I think those are good words.
The other interesting thing which I've discovered is that if you look at the opening of John, and you have the word dwelt among us, the original is the word tabernacled among us. And so I can't help feeling that the whole of the tabernacle, really, God dwelling among us, is a grand type of the Lord Jesus Christ, who was God dwelling among us in a certain sense.
So here's my comments on this section. The temple was seen as the center of all fertility, so much so that if the temple was adversely affected, it could affect all creation. Indications of the temple being linked to fertility, the fertility of creation, can be seen in rabbinic material and Philo. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to make 2 citations. One is from a Targum, and the other one is from Philo. And hopefully you'll see that they kind of speak in a very similar type of way. And the Lord spoke with Moses, saying, on the day of the first month, that is the month of Nisan, on the first of the month, you shall rear up the tabernacle of ordinance, and you shall set there the ark of the testimony and overlay the ark with the mercy seat. And you shall bring in the table on the north side, because from there are given riches, and for from there distill the drops of the latter rain upon the herbs for the food of the inhabitants of the world. And you shall arrange its orders 2 rows of bread, comprising 6 cakes in a row, answering to the tribes of Jacob. So there, in that text, the Targum, what it's doing is associating the northern side with the rains and fertility. And what you're going to see in this next citation is from Philo, and he speaks in a very, very similar way. So he's going to talk about the table on the northern side, and notice what he says. and the table on which the bread and salt are laid was placed on the northern side, since it is the north which is the most productive of winds, and because to all nourishment proceeds from heaven and earth, the one giving rain and the other bringing to perfection all seeds by means of the irrigation of water. So what these two sources attest to is that the northern side is associated with the idea of fertility and rain and things like this. And this is central to the idea that the temple was considered to be the center focus of all creation. And so much so that if the temple is adversely affected, it can affect all of creation. And what I'm going to do now, this is from another source, a rabbinic source, and it's going to talk about what happened after the destruction of the temple. But notice the kind of links that they make through the destruction of the temple and the well-being of creation. So it goes like this. Joshua made a statement to the same effect. His words are traditioned by Kaban Shimon ben Gamaliel. Ever since the day that the temple was destroyed, there is no day without a curse, and no Jew has fallen for blessing and the taste of the fruits has been taken away. Yos said, even the fatness of the fruits has been taken away. Shimon ben Eliezer said, the ritual purity which ceased caused the taste and smell of the fruit to cease. The tithe which ceased caused fat and corn to cease. So long as the service of the temple exists, the world is full of blessing for its inhabitants, and the rains fall in their seasons, as it's written. So there, basically, it's connecting the idea of temple service to the stability of all creation. And as we've seen in the other places in the Targum and in Philo, again, it's the idea of connected to fertility. So when we think about the land of Israel, you get texts like in Ezekiel chapter 38, where the land of Israel is considered to be the center of the earth. So this is cosmic geography, where the temple now is dead center of the entire conceptual universe. And it's on the highest mountain, as per like Isaiah chapter 2, where it's going to be on the temple is on the highest mountain. And so basically, when the temple is destroyed, it affects all of creation. And so it's just like the principle of the high priest who's acting as a microcosm of all creation. Because he acts as a microcosm of all creation, he can bring all of creation with him when he goes before the Most High, when he does his priestly service. And the sources bear this out. Philo talks about this, how when the high priest goes in before the Most High, he doesn't just intercede for his own nation, but he intercedes for all of creation. And so when we think about the Messiah and how he's in a high priestly context, it now makes sense as to why you've got this kind of imagery of the heavens and the earth being united and joined and reconciled in him together, because these are high priestly categories. And it's built off of what we have here in the Torah in how the tabernacle stroke high priest is being associated all the way back to creation. Because this is the place where the heavens and the earth mesh together and come together. And this is restored, renewed creation that's being on show and on offer for those who would participate in it. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Naz. I got a question about the products being used again.
Sure.
So, why is acacia wood such a prominent item here?
I would imagine that they would be using the best of the best, right? So certainly when it comes to the temple, like Solomon's temple, they take wood from like Lebanon, right? Cedars from Lebanon. Okay. And so what's interesting is when you get to the text of like Deuteronomy, when Moses is about to die, obviously he can't go into the land, but what he does, he looks out over the land, and one of the places that he sees, for some reason, he sees Lebanon. You know, why is he seeing Lebanon? And this was a kind of a ancient kind of question, like head scratcher. You know, why is the text of the Torah talking about Lebanon? Well, the way that this was understood in the Second Temple period, in the Dead Sea Scrolls and even in the rabbinic material, is that Lebanon is basically a code word for the temple, right? And so basically, what the text of the Torah in Deuteronomy is interpreted to say is that when Moshe looked out across the land, he was actually looking not at Lebanon, the physical location, but he was actually looking at the temple. Because later on, the temple is associated with kind of cedars of Lebanon, the best of the best. And so I would imagine that when it comes to like acacia wood, it's the same principle. It's the best of the best that they had, if that makes sense.
It's supposed to be the most enduring wood. Remember, oak lasts a long time, but acacia apparently is the wood which lasts the longest and tough. So
Okay.
it has that sense of enduring longevity.
I'd like to add on to that because I was reading some verses from the gospel yesterday, related to Jesus' travels through, I think it's Lebanon, and he visits Sidon and Tyre. So I thought that was
Yes.
significant to say, like, oh, well, you got Jesus traveling through Lebanon, and then you have the wood and the tabernacle associated with Lebanon. That's how far back that the tabernacle goes, and that's just how significant that Lebanon was to Israel.
Well, of course, Lebanon was the source of the cedars, and there was a pact between Hiram, king of Tyre, and David. They were very close friends.
Mm-hmm.
Solomon, of course, fell out with them because Hiram gave him certain cities, Solomon gave him certain cities in payment for the cedars, and Hiram didn't think much of the cities that Solomon gave him, or towns he gave him. And so there was a kind of falling out amongst them. But the king of Tyre, you've got a parable in the prophecy of Ezekiel, but it says that the king of Tyre dwelt in Eden. Well, this was referring back to the time of King David, when Tyre and David were in fellowship together, and the king of Tyre came to the Holy Land and experienced that Edenic bliss, which they later apostatized from.
Dean?
Yeah, I was writing something down. But any other questions or comments?
Or insults.
There we go.
Cool. All right. So making the lampstand. Read all of it.
Yeah, so we're in verses 17 to 29 now.
29. Got it. So making the lampstand. He also made the lampstand of pure gold. He made the lampstand of hammered work, its base, its stems, its cups, its calyxes, and its flowers were of one piece with it. And there were 6 branches going out of its sides, 3 branches of the lampstand out of one side of it, and 3 branches of the lampstand out of the other side of it. 3 cups were made like almond blossoms, each with calyx and flower, and one branch, and on one branch, and 3 cups made like almond blossoms, each with calyx and flower on the other branch. So for the 6 branches going out of the lampstand. And on the lampstand itself were 4 cups made like almond blossoms, with their calyxes and flowers, and a calyx of one piece with it under each pair of the 6 branches going out of it. Their calyxes and their branches were of one piece with it. The whole of it was a single piece of hammered work of pure gold. And he made its 7 lamps, and its tongues, and its trays of pure gold. He made it and all its utensils out of a talent of pure gold. And then we move on to the making of the altar of incense. Verse 25, he made the altar of incense of acacia wood. Its length was a cubit, and its breadth was a cubit. It was square, and 2 cubits was its height. Its horns were of one piece with it. He overlaid it with pure gold. Its top and its round and its top and around its sides and its horns. He made a molding of gold around it, and made 2 rings of gold on it under its molding, on 2 opposite sides of it, as holders for the poles with which to carry it. And he made the poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold. He made the holy anointing oil also, and the pure fragrant incense, blended as by the perfumer.
Okay, so here's my comments. So obviously we've got lots of intricate details about the various different elements of the temple, and so every part of creation is ultimately going to be represented. And in the next few sections after this section, we're going to go through the different Jewish sources which look upon the high priest and the temple, and we're going to go through the various interpretations, like for instance what Philo says, what Josephus says, what the rabbinic material says, and also some other sources say about this as well, just to give the audience the feel of how the different sources were interpreting these things. So when we think of things like Ephesians 1:10, it says this: in the dispensation of the fullness of times, that all things might again be made new in the Messiah, things in the heaven and things on the earth. So again, you've got this concentration on of the heavens and the earth, and they're going to be made new in the Messiah. As the Messiah is our high priest, he's also acting as a microcosm of the universe. Given the association in the Second Temple period with the high priest stroke tabernacle with the universe, it becomes much more understandable as to why the Messiah is associated with making things anew in the heavens and on the earth. Contained in him is the entire universe. In his death, creation itself has the potential to die, and also in him, creation has the potential to be reborn and created anew. So you'll have texts like the following in Colossians chapter 1, verse 17. And he is before all things, and all things have subsisted in him. And he is the head of the body, the assembly, who is the beginning, the firstborn out of the dead, that he be preeminent in all things, because all the fullness was pleased to dwell in him, and through him making peace by the blood of his cross, to reconcile all things to himself, through him, whether the things on the earth or things in the heavens. So there's 2 things here that should be highlighted. Verse 17, and all things have subsisted in him. So if we think about the Messiah in terms of being a high priest and how the high priest was associated with being a microcosm of the universe, his death and his work has now cosmic consequences. The Greek word translated there in the English subsisted means to stand together, to be compacted together, to cohere, to be constituted with. And so basically the Messiah is holding the entire universe together. And the Messiah is acting as a priestly mediator, representing all of creation before the Most High. And so those who accept this kind of mediation then have the ability to die with the Messiah. So Romans chapter 6, verse 8. Now, since we died with the Messiah, we trust that we shall live with him. How exactly can we die with Messiah? We die in Messiah as he is a representative of all creation, whether of the heavens or of the earth. This is Romans chapter 6, verse 6. Knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him, that the body of sin might be nullified, so that we may no longer serve sin. We are crucified with him. And if we die with him, then we're going to be raised with him. As in his resurrection again, he is again acting as a representation of a renewed, restored creation. And thus his death and resurrection have cosmic consequences. And so if you think about like verses like 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14, it says this: for the love of the Messiah constrains us to reason thus: one died for all, therefore all are dead. And again in 2 Corinthians it says this in chapter 5, verse 17: therefore, if anyone is united with the Messiah, he is a new creation. The old has passed. Look, what has come is fresh and new. So there you got two ideas of, number one, in the Messiah, you're a new creation. Number two, if one died, then therefore all died. So you've got death and you've got resurrection. But all of this is really summed up in one person. So on what basis can one man die for another man's sin? If that person contained in himself the entire creation, and when he dies acts as a representation of all creation, and it dies in him when he dies, then when he gets resurrected, he's also resurrecting all of creation as he represents all of creation. And so basically he brings to a close one creation, and then he, through his resurrection, brings new restored creation. And so basically you're now participating in that. He's just acting as the high priestly representative in that kind of context. And when Philo talks about the high priest, this is going to be a kind of a long quote, but it's worth quoting because actually Philo, he talks about the high priest, but he speaks in a very similar way to what you've just read or heard in Colossians. And so just bear with this quote for a moment. The high priest, then, being equipped in this way, is properly prepared for the performance of all sacred ceremonies, that whenever he enters the temple to offer up prayers and sacrifices in use among his nation, all the world may likewise enter in with him, by means of the imitations of it which he bears about him, the garment reaching to his feet being the imitation of the air, the pomegranate of the water, the flowery hem of the earth, and the scarlet dye of his robe being an emblem of fire. Also the mantle over his shoulders being a representation of heaven itself, the two hemispheres being further indicated by the round emeralds on the shoulder blades, on each of which were engraved 6 characters equivalent to the 6 signs of the zodiac. The 12 stones arranged on the breast in the 4 rows of 3 stones each, namely the logium, being also an emblem of that reason which holds together and regulates the universe. So when Philo's talking about the high priest, he concentrates on the breastplate containing the stones, and he links the idea and the imagery of the stones to the regulation and the holding together of the entire universe. And so when Colossians is talking about the Messiah, it speaks in a very, very similar way, because all things are sustained in him. The heavens and the earth, everything is sustained in him. So Philo is talking very similarly, like you see in Colossians. And so these are high, I would say, high priestly categories that are being used in this kind of very exalted kind of language that you're seeing in Colossians. And if you think about texts like Galatians chapter 6, verse 14, it says this: "But may it never be for me to boast, except in the cross of our Master Yeshua HaMashiach, through whom the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world." So you've got this idea of the world being crucified to him. So how can the world be crucified? Well, if the Messiah acts as a representation of all creation, when he dies, all of creation dies with him, and therefore all of the world is crucified with him. And so you've got these very cosmic consequences if we think in terms of high priest, of what's going on. But that ends my comments.
Do you say that Philo mentions 6 signs of the zodiac? Did I understand that correctly?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I missed that.
Yeah, so when you're mentioning, imagery of, I think like high priest or something, and you're quoting the long quote from Philo.
Yeah.
Did you mention something about like 6 signs of the zodiac?
Yeah, so we're going to go through the cosmic symbolism and so forth like that in the coming up sources.
Okay.
But what we've actually got a parashah document. Within that document, the majority of what I'm talking about, I've actually cited. So you've got all of the sources that you can actually read. But in the next sections, we're going to go through the various different strands of Jewish thought, including Philo, and then we'll detail which parts of the elements represent different parts of creation, and then you'll get a fuller picture of what's going on, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you.
So I also put a picture of the lampstand if you wanted the visual representation. I think that's an adequate picture in the Parsha Talk channel.
Let's
Yep,
have
I
a
see
look.
it.
Yep. Yep, that'll do 7 branched menorah. And we'll get into the kind of symbolism of what that meant in the Second Temple period. I'll show the sources or at least speak them out. But anyone who's interested in the sources can look at the actual parashah document. I've got like footnotes and so you can actually look at the sources for yourself and assess what I'm saying.
I
Okay.
mentioned earlier connections with the Gospel of John. The menorah in the tabernacle was almost the principal source of light in the holy place, and therefore is representative of the Word of God and the light shining through Christ. So in the Gospel of John, when you get to the 12th chapter, John picks up the symbology of the practice which they had of taking the menorah and lighting it on in the women's quarter, I think it was, about the city of Jerusalem, so that the light would shine over the city. And then Jesus is picked up by John as saying, I am the light of the world. So he is identifying himself with the menorah in that way. They also find that this is further extended by Jesus himself in the Sermon on the Mount when he says to the disciples, ye are the light of the world. So that not only himself, but also those who are in him also become lights shining in the darkness of the world. It's also in Philippians where he says that the ecclesia, the congregation or the church, is the a lampstand shining brightly in the world. And of course, again in Revelation, you have 7 churches or ecclesias represented by the 7 menorahs or lampstands. So there's a lot of things which are taken in the New Testament from the symbology of this period, this part of the tabernacle. Extremely interesting subject matter. The oil which lit the lampstand was brought by the congregation. This is very interesting because it's so different from the way in which the churches operate, where principally you have a pastor or you have a leader who speaks the word and the laity receive it. That's not the representation in the scripture. What you have is everybody bringing the olive oil, and it's beaten olive oil. So it's speaking about the tribulations, the experiences we go through with the Word of God, bringing that to light the candlestick. So very significant in scripture, this.
Any other comments, questions?
So the next section is Exodus chapter 38, verses 1 to 20.
So we're going to be making the altar of burnt offering. And it says, he made the altar of burnt offering of acacia wood. 5 cubits was its length, and 5 cubits its breadth. It was square, and 3 cubits was its height. He made horns for it on its 4 corners. Its horns were of one piece with it, and he overlaid it with bronze. And he made all the utensils of the altar, the pots, the shovels, the basins, the forks, and the fire pans. He made all its utensils of bronze. And he made for the altar of a grating, a network of bronze, under its ledge, extending halfway down. He cast 4 rings on the 4 corners of the bronze grating as holders for the poles. He made the poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with bronze. And he put the poles through the rings on the sides of the altar to carry it with them. He made it hollow with boards. Did you want me to keep going to 8?
Can you go to verse 20, right? Because we're verse
Yeah.
1 to 20.
Making the bronze basin. He made the basin of bronze and its stand of bronze. From the mirrors of the ministering women who ministered in the entrance of the tent of meeting. Verse 9 says the making of the court, and he made the court. For the south side, the hangings of the court were of fine twined linen, 100 cubits. There were 20 pillars, and their 20 bases were of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. And for the north side there were hangings of 100 cubits. Their 20 pillars and their 20 bases were of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. And for the west side were hangings, their 10 pillars and their 10 bases. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. And for the front to the east, 50 cubits. The hangings for one side of the gate were 15 cubits, with their 3 pillars and 3 bases. And so for the other side, on both sides of the gate of the court were hangings of 15 cubits, and their 3 pillars and their 3 bases. All the hangings around the court were of fine twined linen, and the bases for the pillars were of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. The overlaying of their capitals were also of silver, and all the pillars of the court were filleted with silver. And the screen for the gate of the court was embroidered with needlework in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. It was 20 cubits long and 5 cubits high in its breadth, corresponding to the hangings of the court. And their pillars were 4 in number. Their 4 bases were of bronze, their hooks of silver, and the overlaying of the capitals and their fillets of silver. And all the pegs for the tabernacle and for the court all around were of bronze. So I noticed that this one's covered in fine twined linen around the court. And I noticed that you were saying that the high priest was also garnered in fine twined linen. So is that symbolic in that same representation?
Yeah. So basically, he's again the high priestly dress is mimicking the construction of the tabernacle, right? If we think back to Genesis, how the construction of Adam or the formation of Adam mimics the creation itself, right? He's taken from the dust, he's formed out of the dust, and then he has the breath of life breathed into him. And so this mimics the principle of creation, where you've got this forming and filling principle in the first 3 days and last 3 days of creation. And so you've got this kind of intrinsic link between Adam and creation. You've also got this intrinsic link also with high priest to temple, right? Because if the temple is a representation of the universe, then it makes sense that he's some way associated to it as well, just like how Adam's associated with creation. So what I've done, I've actually pulled together various different strands of Jewish thought in the cosmic symbolism of the temple stroke tabernacle. And in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 after this one, sections, I'm gonna choose Josephus first, and then I'm going to go to Philo, and then I'm going to go to the rabbinic material, and then after that I've got a couple of other sources to go to, just to kind of break it all down for the audience. And so all of this, what you're going to hear, is in the Parashah document. If you're on, if you go to the Parashah channel, I've actually posted it. If you just scroll up a bit, you can see the references from Josephus, the rabbinic material, and Philo, but you won't have the fourth section. So basically, when Josephus is talking about the temple, these are the types of associations that he makes with the temple. And you're going to see a crossover with the other Jewish sources. Sometimes they agree in how things were being viewed. And so they're not always going to agree at every single point. The key here is that what these sources demonstrate is that across the board, the Jewish sources were all looking at the temple and high priest and associating it with the universe. And so this is what Josephus says. This is kind of like a summary of what he says. So for Josephus, the correlation goes like this. The three parts of the temple, these are in correspondence to the three parts of the world, namely the court equals the sea, the holy house, the land, and the holy of holies, the heavens. So you've got this kind of three-tiered kind of universe. The heavens, the earth, and the sea, and you've got three divisions of the tabernacle, which is the Holy of Holies, the holy place, and the outer court. So you've got the correspondence to the three-tiered kind of conception of the universe. The 12 loaves on the table, this represents the 12 months of the year. So you've got sacred time being demonstrated as well. The candlestick of 70 parts, this relates to the division of the planets into tens. The 7 lamps upon the candlestick, these refer to the course of the planets, which there are 7 in number. So in the ancient world, they could see 7 visible planets. And so they associate the menorah to the 7 visible planets. The veil is composed of 4 things. And this represents the 4 elements. The plain linen, that represents the earth because it grows out of the earth. The purple, it represents the sea because purple is gained out of the blood of a shellfish. The blue of the color of the veils represents the air. The scarlet represents the fire. The outer curtain has the mystical embroidery of the heavens upon it. The vestment of the high priest was made of fine linen, again representing the earth. The blue cloth of the garments of the high priest equals the sky. The pomegranates, they represent lightning, and the noise of its bells are thunder. And the gold represents the splendor by all which things are enlightened. So that's kind of a summary there of what Josephus talks about when he talks about the high priest and the temple. And what we're going to see in the other Jewish sources like Philo, the rabbinic material, and other sources is that they also do a very, very similar thing. Sometimes they agree with the interpretation. Sometimes they have a different kind of view about what part represents, what part of the universe and so forth like this. But the idea is that they're all drawing upon a common understanding and a common tradition and a common way of reading the Torah in associating the temple with all creation. So that's going to end my comments for this section until we get to the next section, which we're going to deal with Philo.
Okay. Any other comments?
Well, the New Testament Revelation says that the fine linen represents the righteousness of the saints. Now, there are 70 pillars around the tabernacle. Solomon refers to 70 soldiers guarding the king. So it seems to me that this is a representation of the believers guarding the purity of the truth and holding the righteousness of Christ together. The high priest, with his garments of glory and beauty, when on the Day of Atonement, he took off those garments and he wore just the white garment, the fine linen, which basically is showing that Christ, when he offered for the atonement, he was declaring the righteousness of God, the fine linen being the righteousness. But once he had completed those offerings, the high priest came out and blessed the people. But he was then dressed in his garments of glory and beauty. So he's dressed in the resurrection splendor. So I think there's those aspects to those. With respect to the burnt offerings, the altar of burnt offering and the burnt offering. I mean, we're skipping over an awful lot here, but But the burnt offering essentially was not what we consider to be a burnt offering. We consider something to be wholly consumed in the sense of it's completely destroyed. The idea of the burnt offering was that it was lifted up to God. It was something which ascended to him. And the ashes which were collected were taken to a clean place. And the parts of the offering were cut up and washed. The inward parts were cleaned, weren't they? And then they were burnt on the altar. Jesus makes reference to these when he's talking to the scribe, who asks him which is the greatest commandment. And he says, the scribe says to him, these are more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And Jesus says, you're not far from the kingdom of God. And so what he's showing is that the mind of the scribe was attuned to God. And so to love the Lord your God with all your might, all your strength, all your heart, all your soul. These are the four elements which are there in the burnt offering. It is the complete and utter dedication to God in your life, being lifted up to God by the consumption of the flame of the Word of God. There's a tremendous amount in all of this, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. I like that. You mentioned ashes. Could you tell me where those ashes were used later?
Where the reference is?
Oh no, like what did they do with the ashes?
We don't know. We're just told to take it to a clean place. It
Clean
doesn't say any more than that. We're not told what the clean place was, except that we're to assume from that, therefore, that the ashes were not, as is generally thought, the thing is burnt and destroyed. It's not that at all. It's the fact that it's transformed.
Mm-hmm. Right, the imagery.
So the next section is Exodus chapter 38, verse 21 to 31.
Sorry, I just lost my spot here. Okay, so the materials used. These are the amounts of the materials used for the tabernacle of the covenant law, which were recorded at Moses' command by the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, the son of Aaron, the priest. Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, made everything the Lord commanded Moses. With him was Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, an engraver and a designer, and an embroiderer in blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen. The total amount of the gold from the wave offering used for all the work on the sanctuary was 29 talents and 730 shekels, according to the sanctuary shekel. The silver obtained from those of the community who were counted in the census was 100 talents and 1775 shekels, according to the sanctuary shekel. 1 beka per person, that is half a shekel. Excuse me. According to the sanctuary shekel, from every one who had crossed over to those counted 20 years old or more, a total of 603,550 men. The 100 talents of silver were used to cast the bases for the sanctuary and for the curtains. 100 bases from the 100 talents, 1 talent for each base. They used the 1,775 shekels to make the hooks for the posts. to overlay the tops of the posts and to make their bands. The bronze from the wave offering was 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. They used it to make the bases for the entrance to the tent of meeting. The bronze altar was its bronze grating and all its utensils, the bases for the surrounding courtyard, and those for its entrance, and all the tent pegs for the tabernacle, and those for the surrounding courtyard.
Okay, so we're moving on to what Philo says now. We've done Josephus. This is going to be what Philo, and this is going to be a summary of what he sees when he's talking about the tabernacle stroke high priest. And a lot of his interpretations are going to agree with Josephus, but there's going to be some different ones. So this is a summary. So the high priest garments equal the universe. The 12 loaves equal the number of months of the year. Incense relates to the 4 elements. Animal offerings. Philo gives us a very interesting interpretation. And he says when it comes to the animal offerings, he says that even the animals represent different parts of creation. And he goes into specific reasons as to why this particular animal or that particular animal represents a specific part of creation. The cherubim represent 2 hemispheres surrounding the earth, but Philo also says that these represent kingly aspects of the divine as well. The altar of incense, he links to the gratitude and the earth. The menorah, again, just like with Josephus, he links to the 7 stars, stroke the heavens. The stones on the shoulders of the high priest, he links to the sun and moon, the 2 hemispheres, just like Josephus does. The stones on the high priestly breastplate, he links to the zodiac. And we'll just stop there for a moment. If you think about that for a moment, the stones on the breastplate of the high priest, the tribal fathers in Genesis are actually linked to stars. If you remember the dream that Joseph had, where his brothers are seen as stars, and his father is seen as the sun, and the mother is seen as the moon. And so you do have this star imagery that's associated with the tribal fathers. And so when you're thinking about the breastplate, it contains the names of the tribes. And so you've got this natural association in the Torah internally already of the tribes to stars. So the fine flax of the curtains is an emblem of the earth. The color of the curtains is a symbol of the air. The purple of the curtains is a symbol of the water. The scarlet of the curtains is a symbol of fire. The high priest's robe, its specific color, is an emblem of the air again. The fringe of the pomegranates around the ankles and flowers and bells. The flowers equal the emblem of the earth. The pomegranates equal the symbol of water. The bells, an emblem of concord and harmony that exists between these things. The table of showbread is placed on the northern side, and again, we've read through specifically what Philo says about that. He connects it to the idea of productive winds and nourishment. And the menorah placed on the southern side, this is linked to the stars and the revolutions in the south. So again, this is Philo, and he's writing before Josephus. And there's a lot of agreement between Josephus and Philo in how they're interpreting what's happening in relation to the temple and how it's associated with creation. And so basically what this attests to is a very common understanding of this worldview. And you're going to see this reflected in other texts as well, which we're going to go through. The next texts are going to be the rabbinic material, where they're also going to make this kind of cosmic symbolism. And then there's a bit more of material after that. But the central idea there is that across the board, they're all associating this type of imagery to the temple. And so when you get to text like Revelation chapter 1, when it's talking about the 7 lampstands and the menorah, and then it brings in star imagery, what's the fundamental connection there between the menorah imagery in Revelation number 1 and the star imagery? Well, if you understood how the menorah was being associated in the Second Temple period, that type of association would make complete sense, because that was a normal standard association. And we can demonstrate this in a myriad of different sources. We can go to Philo, Josephus, in the rabbinic material, etc., etc. And so it's really, really important to get our heads around what was their worldview of the Second Temple period. How did they understand these things, and what types of associations were they making? Anyway, so that ends my comments for that particular section.
Any questions?
Hey, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go.
Do have slightly different take colors and some of the symbols. We take, for example, the pomegranate. The pomegranate is the most hated of all the fruit, and its its spherical shape is significant of speaking of the one body in Christ, so that you have speaking really of the multi Christ of many one, and that together with the bells, the sound as the high priest was walking, so that you would know he was coming. The Psalms speak about hearing the joyful sound, and I think the idea is picking up the idea of the priests walking. Really, the sounding of the bells, the sounding of the gospel in bringing together many in Christ. And the raiment of blue around the skirt of the garment, blue symbolizing heavenly or the word of God, is that the high priest is walking at all times within the law, the word, so as our walk within the word, within the parameter. So I do have slightly different takes. Gold seems to be representative of tried faith, scarlet of sin. So these things seem to fit in for my own personal view, but the studies have come from that direction.
Cool, thank you. Any other comments? Questions? I had one. I don't know if people are interested in measurements, but there's a lot of measurements involved in this passing of the scripture here. Like for instance, what is a talent? How big is a talent? And I don't know if it's correct to say, but it's about 75 pounds or in a metric 34 kilograms. Would that be justified to say that?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't know weights and measurements. I'd have to check into that. These are tricky things, right? Because we're dealing in approximations, right?
Right.
Because obviously in the ancient world, when it comes to like weight, measurement and weight, it's probably going to be a different standard than what we have today. And so whatever I think it's going to be an approximation, whatever kind of translation that you get, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's like I got these notes somewhere, but a talent's about 75 pounds, and like you said, they are approximations. A handbreadth is about 3 inches. A cubit's about 18 inches.
Yeah, but especially when you get into the nitty gritty details of like there's different cubits, right? You've got like an older cubit and you've got a newer cubit, and and which cubit are they working on? It's difficult.
So it's just kind of wanted to note, like the lampstand, for instance, was all done in 1 talent of gold.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a work. I mean, must have taken some skill to do that, and that's why the text is pointing out the skill base, right? That people are filled with the Spirit, and so again, it's really connecting back to the idea that they're creating a microcosm of the universe, and you've got texts where in the Tanakh where the Most High is associated with creation and uses his wisdom to create and form and so forth like this, and in the text of the Torah, there it keeps repeating, it keeps emphasizing the wisdom that they had, the understanding that they had to construct these things. And so again, it's placing them in a very divine type of role as the Most High would be at creation.
Yep. And just like to restate, there was 29 talents of gold used, 730 shekels as well. So we're dealing with massive,
some people
massive amounts.
There is a view that, like, when you get to the 29, for instance, that 29 is a very suspicious type of number, and it suspiciously looks like kind of like a lunar year, a lunar month. Sorry. And some would take the position that inbuilt within the actual numbers is to do with calendar. I don't know too much stuff about it myself. I just know the view is out there. You also see this view when it comes to like the ages in Genesis. In the listing of the ages, there's some within scholarship who have tried to kind of break that down and said, well, maybe this is referring to some type of calendar, and you do get an indication of this type of understanding when it comes to like the age of Enoch, for instance, 365, which would equate to a solar year. So, is there something more there? I would say there is, but I don't have enough data to really say either way. So the next section,
or we're moving on.
The next section is Exodus 39 verses 1 to 21.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't have that pull up. 39.
Yeah, chapter 39 verses 1 to 21.
Okay. Okay, so making the priestly garments. From the blue and purple and scarlet yarns, they made finely woven garments for ministering in the holy place. They made the holy garments for Aaron, and as the Lord had commanded Moses. He made the ephod of gold, blue, and purple scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. And they hammered out gold leaf, and he cut it into threads to work into the blue and purple and the scarlet yarns and into the fine twined linen in skilled design. They made for the ephod attaching shoulder pieces joined to at its two edges. And the skillfully woven band on it was one piece, and the skillfully woven band on it was of one piece with it, and made like it of gold, blue, and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, as the Lord had commanded Moses. They made the onyx stones enclosed in settings of gold filigree, and engraved like the engravings of a signet, according to the names of the sons of Israel. And he set them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod to be stones of remembrance for the sons of Israel, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He made the breastpiece in skilled work, in the style of the ephod, of gold, blue, and purple and scarlet yarns, in fine twined linen. It was square. They made the breastpiece doubled, a span its length, and they spanned its breadth when doubled. And they set in it 4 rows of stones. A row of sardius, topaz, and carbuncle was the first row, and the second row, an emerald, a sapphire, and a diamond. And the third row, a jacinth, an agate, and an amethyst. And the fourth row, a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. They were enclosed in settings of gold filigree. there were 12 stones with their names according to the names of the sons of Israel. They were like signets, each engraved with its name, for the 12 tribes. And they made on the breastpiece twisted chains like cords of pure gold. And they made 2 settings of filigree and 2 gold rings, and put the 2 rings on the 2 edges of the breastpiece. And they put the 2 cords of gold and the 2 rings at the edges of the breastpiece. They attached the 2 ends of the 2 cords to the 2 settings of filigree. Thus they attached it in front to the shoulder pieces of the ephod. Then they made the 2 rings of gold, and put them at the 2 ends of the breastpiece, on its inside edge next to the ephod. And they made 2 rings of gold, and attached them in front to the lower part of the 2 shoulder pieces of the ephod, at its seam above the skillfully woven band of the ephod. And they bound the breastpiece by its rings to the rings of the ephod with a lace of blue, so that it should lie on the skillfully woven band of the ephod, and that the breastpiece should not come loose from the ephod, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He also made the robe of the ephod woven all of blue, and the opening of the robe in it was like the opening in a garment, with a binding around the opening, so that it might not tear. On the hem of the robe they made pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. They also made bells of pure gold, and put the bells between the pomegranates around the hem of the robe. Between the pomegranates, a bell and a pomegranate around the hem of the robe for ministering, as the Lord had commanded Moses. They also made the coats woven of fine linen for Aaron and his sons, and the turban of fine linen, and the caps of fine linen, and the linen undergarments of fine twined linen, and the sash of fine twined linen, and of blue and purple and scarlet yarns, embroidered with needlework, as the Lord had commanded Moses. They made the plate of the holy crown of gold, of pure gold, and wrote on it an inscription, like the engraving of a signet, holy to the Lord. They tied to it a cord of blue to fasten it on the turban above, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished, and the people of Israel did according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So they did. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses, the tent and all its utensils, its hooks, its frames, its bars, its pillars, and its bases, the covering of tan ram skins and goat skins, and the veil of the screen, the ark of the testimony with its poles and the mercy seat, the table with all its utensils, and the bread of the presence, the lampstand of pure gold and its lamps, with the lamps set and all its utensils, and the oil for the light, the golden altar, the anointing oil and the fragrant incense, and the screen for the entrance of the tent, the bronze altar and its grating of bronze, its poles and all its utensils, the basin and its stand, the hangings of the court, its pillars and its bases, and the screen for the gate of the court, its cords and its pegs, and all the utensils for the service of the tabernacle, for the tent of meeting, the finely worked garments for ministering in the holy place, the holy garment for Aaron the priest, and the garments of his sons for their service as priests, according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So the people of Israel had done all the work. And Moses saw all the work, and behold, they had done it, as the Lord had commanded. So had they done it. Then Moses blessed them.
There we go. So you kind of overshot, but never.
I think I did, huh? I think I did.
Don't worry, I can compact everything together. It's fine. So I'm going to go through the rabbinic symbolism now. So we've had Philo, we've had Josephus, and so this is the rabbinic symbolism. So the table on the northern side, again, they associate this with the rain that comes from the north. The menorah placed on the southern side, they connect that with the pathway of the stars. The 7 lamps, they refer that to the 7 stars. In one source, which resemble the just. The tabernacle's golden hooks, they say that this represents the stars. The temple's marble appears to look like water. The veil or the curtains represents the heavens. The bronze laver represents the seas. The cherubim represents the birds. Adam represents Aaron. This is an important connection that the rabbinic material makes, because if the temple or tabernacle is a restored, renewed creation, and it's Eden-like, because you've got for instance, the cherubim imagery there. Where's the new Adam? Well, the new Adam is Aaron. And so in the rabbinic material, it actually links Adam and Aaron together. And this is also seen in the Hebrew of Ben Sirach as well, where there's a comparison between Adam and Simon the high priest. So you've got 2 different sources there, both associating Adam with a high priestly figure. The tabernacle itself represents the universe. The Holy of Holies represents the heavens, the inner court, the earth, the courtyard, the sea, the 12 oxen, the zodiac, and the menorah, the 7 planets. So there you've got from different Jewish sources, whether that be the Targums or Midrash Rabbah, Numbers, and a host of other places as well. And so again, you've got this strand of thought in the rabbinic material in another Jewish source, which links the temple to being a microcosm of all creation. So you've got it in Philo, you've got it in Josephus, and you've got it in the rabbinic material. And because you've read on, I can do this. I can go through other sources as well. So this is going to be outside sources that are not Philo, Josephus, or the rabbinic material. This is, for instance, from the Book of Wisdom, Wisdom of Solomon. And so this source says this, and this source can be dated to around about the 1st century. So he overcome the destroyer not with the strength of body nor force of arms, but with a sword subdued him that punished, alleging the oaths and covenants made with the fathers. For when the dead were now fallen by heaps one upon another, standing between, he stayed the wrath and parted the way to the living. For in the long garment was the whole world, and in the 4 rows of stones was the glory of the fathers graven, and your majesty upon the diadem on his head. Unto these the destroyer gave place, and was afraid of them, for it was enough that they only tasted of the wrath. So what the wisdom of Solomon is doing here is conceptualizing the high priest in terms of Aaron. When he delivers the people, he goes out in his priestly garments in the Torah, and he stops the plague. And so what this source points out is that the garments there are associated with the whole world. I'll read the verse again. For in the long garment was the whole world. And so again, it's another Jewish source which identifies the high priest being a microcosm of all the universe. Similarly, this is from a source known as Ben Sirach. Ben Sirach was written before the 1st century, and in the chapter dealing with the high priest, it describes the high priest, and it says this: he was as the morning star in the midst of a cloud, and as the moon at the full, as the sun shining upon the temple of the Most High, and as the rainbow giving light in the bright clouds, and as the flower of roses in the spring of the year, as lilies by the rivers of waters, and as the branches of the frankincense tree in the time of summer, as fire and incense in the censer, and as a vessel of beaten gold set with all manner of precious stones, and as a fair olive tree budding forth fruit, and as a cypress tree that grows up to the clouds. So there you got Ben Sirach, and he's conceptualizing the high priest, and he associates the high priest with various different elements of creation. So that really finishes up the different sources, the different Jewish sources, in a summary kind of way, when they're conceptualizing the high priest and the tabernacle. And so you've got this now lead up to the construction of the temple and its tabernacle, and it's going to be now erected. And there are places in chapters 39-40 of Exodus that the Hebrew is very reminiscent of what you see at creation in Genesis chapter 1, when the Most High is presiding over creation. So I'm gonna go through that as you've already read the verses. The separation of so basically what we're going to do, there's going to be a comparison with creation here, and so there are verbal parallels between Moshe and the Most High, Moses and the Most High. So, for instance, Exodus chapter 40, verse 33, it says this: "And he raises up the court round about the tabernacle and about the altar, and places the covering of the gate of the court, and Moses completed the work." So this aspect of completing the work is very reminiscent of what you see in Genesis 2:2, where it says this: "And God completes by the seventh day his work, which he had made." And so again, it's very elusive to Genesis chapter 2 there, but you'll see that there's other parallels that kind of stack up. So this is Exodus 39:43. "And Moses sees all the work, and lo, they have done it as Yehovah has commanded." And so this aspect of looking over the work, seeing the work, is also evident in the Genesis account, where in chapter 1 verse 31 it says this: "And God saw all that he had done, and lo, very good." It was very good. And so again, it's the Most High presiding over creation, looking over it, and Moses is presented as in the role of the Most High, looking over the tabernacle, i.e., all creation. And so we got another parallel here. This is Exodus 39:43. "And Moses sees all the work, and lo, they have done it as Yehovah has commanded, so they have done. And Moses did bless them." So there you got Moses, and he's blessing the people. And in Genesis chapter 1 verse 28 it says this: "And God blessed them." So again, he's mimicking the Most High at creation, and he's blessing the people. In Genesis chapter 2 verse 3, the Most High sanctifies the seventh day. And in Exodus chapter 40 verse 9, you've got this command: "And you shall take the oil of anointing, and you shall anoint the tabernacle and all that is in it, and you shall sanctify it and all its vessels, and it shall become holy." So you got these very elusive phrases that are employed in Exodus 39:40 to mimic what you see at creation. And when you look at the rabbinic material, which we're going to go through as well, they pick up on these types of associations as well. They note the Hebrew, and they say, look, Moses seems to be in the role of the creator at creation here. There's some greater context that the Torah is hinting towards. And it makes complete sense if you begin to understand how the temple is associated with creation. When you erect the temple, you're erecting all creation, you're making a universe, and therefore it places people in the role of the Most High at creation. So with that, comments, suggestions, opinions, or insults? If not, chapter 40 it is.
I have a question. So,
Sure.
would you say that there's a parallel potentially, like when the temple is being created, that they probably rested on the seventh day, but when it was completed, they still sustained the work during the seventh day? So like the high priest doing sacrifice and stuff like that. So kind of like a mirror image of, in creation, God created for 6 days and rested on the seventh, but he still maintains and upholds creation. So do you know if there's any sources or if there's any talk about if they did work in creating the temple on the seventh day, or if they rested? Do you know?
It's a good question. I don't know of any sources that specifically talk about your specific question.
Okay.
I would say this though. In the Hebrew text of Exodus, there are seven speeches basically, and they're divided by the phrase "and Yehovah said to Moses," and this marks seven speeches, which which then form the instructions to build the tabernacles. And in the seventh speech, it deals with the Sabbath. Okay, so each of the speeches actually mimics one day of creation. And so the final one is the seventh speech, which deals with the Sabbath. And actually, in the text of Exodus, in the exact place, it points back the reader to creation when you get to the seventh speech. So there is kind of like inclusio, like pointing back, so to speak. But you're quite right. When it comes to like sacred space and sacred time, right? Because that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with sacred time. There is this notion, and I don't have any sources off my top of my head for this, but generally when the scholarship talk about this, when they think about the priesthood, they do note that obviously the priests do a lot more work on the Shabbat and things like that. And so you do have this kind of idea that work in temple sacred space is easy. It's not like a hard thing to do. Is you're kind of at ease, and it kind of links back to the idea of the Most High rested from his work, and then obviously mankind rested with him, and so they're mimicking the Most High at creation, so to speak. So I don't know if that goes any towards helping answer your question specifically, but that's what I know from the top of my head.
Any other comments, questions? Chapter 40, the tabernacle erected. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on the first day of the first month, you shall erect the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, and you shall put in it the ark of the testimony, and you shall screen the ark with the veil. And you shall bring in the table and arrange it, and you shall bring in the lampstand and set up its lamps. And you shall put the golden altar for incense before the ark of the testimony, and set up the screen for the door of the tabernacle. You shall set up the altar of burnt offering before the door of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, and place the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it. And you shall set up the court all around, and hang up the screen for the gate of the court. How far did you want me to go?
Verse 16.
Okay. Then you shall take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and all that is in it, and consecrate it and all its furniture, so that it may become holy. You shall also anoint the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, and consecrate the altar, so that the altar may become most holy. You shall also anoint the basin and its stand, and consecrate it. Then you shall bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and shall wash them with water, and put on Aaron the holy garments. And you shall anoint him and consecrate him, that he may serve me as a priest. You shall bring his sons also, and put coats on them, and anoint them as you anointed their father, that they may serve me as priests. And their anointing shall admit them to a perpetual priesthood throughout their generations. This Moses did according to all that the Lord commanded him, so he did.
Okay, so there's a few things going on in this chapter. So I'm going to. So when it comes to the 7 divine speeches for the instruction to build the tabernacle, right? You'll find this from Exodus chapter 25 to 31, and the division goes like this: Exodus chapter 25 verse 1 to Exodus chapter 30 verse 10, and then verse 11 begins the second speech. Verse 17 begins the third speech. Verse 22 begins the fourth speech. Verse 34 begins the fifth speech. Chapter 31 verse 11 begins the sixth speech, and sorry, not chapter 11, not verse 11, verse 1, 31 verse 1, and the seventh speech begins at verse 12, chapter 31 verse 12. So there you got a division of 7 divine speeches involving the construction of the tabernacle. When you get to chapter 40, which in the chapter that we're in, you also have a repetition of 7. So the phrase that's used 7 times in this chapter is as Yod-Heh-Vav-Veh commanded Moses. So you can see this repeated in the following verses: chapter 40 verse 21, chapter 40 verse 23, verse 25, verse 27, verse 29, and verse 32. So here you got this repetition of this phrase, just like you got a repetition of the phrase in the 7 speeches to construct the tabernacle. So basically, it's an echo. It's an echo of this 7 kind of number that's associated with temple building. And if you think about the construction of the temple, like Solomon's temple, for instance, Solomon's temple was built in 7 years. And so there is this number 7 being associated with either tabernacle building or temple building. And so when you're thinking about creation, when you've got the 7 day structure that's going on, to someone living in the ancient Near East, it would convey the idea of building a temple. So when the Most High creates creation, he's building his temple, and it's indicated to the audience through this idea of number 7. You've also got texts like Proverbs where wisdom builds her house with 7 pillars, and again, it's the idea of building a house with the number associated with the number 7. And the temple is called the house of Yod-Heh-Vav-Veh in numerous places in the scriptures. And so the temple is being associated with house building and so forth like this, and creation is also being associated with temple in that regard. So again, we have to be very, we have to carefully note when you've got these types of repetitions, because Genesis 1 is very liturgical. And so basically in the Second Temple period, when the temple was standing, there was this group of people who would basically recite or chant Genesis, the first chapter of Genesis, like day 1, they would chant day 1, day 2, they would chant day 2, etc., etc. So when the priesthood were doing their sacrifices, Genesis was actually being chanted and sung for each day. And so again, it bridges this idea of the temple itself has cosmic consequences. It upholds the stability of all creation. And so again, it goes back to the central idea that the temple and the high priest was the focal point of all life, basically, all fertility, all life, etc., etc. And so when you think about this in terms of the Messiah, the type of imageries that are associated with him, it now becomes understandable why you've got this idea of new creation. You've got this idea of how the heavens and the earth are all reconciled in him. It's very high priestly categories that's going on. And fundamentally, it tracks back to the reasoning that we have in the Torah about how one person, i.e. the high priest or Adam, can affect all of creation through his actions. So that kind of finishes off my comments there.
I didn't write too many notes on this. The tabernacle is to be erected. Never mind. Ahead of myself there. I did note a little bit about washing with water Aaron and his sons and anoint and consecrate. Everything's being consecrated and being sanctified.
Yeah, because it's sacred space, right? And so when you're looking at the temple, you've really got to associate it with the idea of Eden. This is the place where the Most High wants to put the world to right. This is it. This is his intention with mankind. This is where he wants to dwell with mankind. And so obviously in that kind of construct, you can't allow strangers into sacred space. You can't allow things to become sinful or so forth like that. This is a picture of restored, renewed creation that you can participate in. and this is where the heavens and the earth join and mesh together. And this is why, for instance, the temple is being associated with mountains, right? You'll see in prophetic texts that the temple is placed on a mountain and so forth like that, because in the ancient world, the mountains are where you meet the divine. And so you've got this kind of cosmic mountain geography that's going on, where it's not only the highest mountain, but it's the central mountain. It's in the center of the earth, so to speak, the center of the universe. It's the conceptual center of the universe and so basically, again, it's the idea of, from that point, all fertility emanates from it. And so you've got these types of ideas being associated with the Messiah and things like that in the Gospels, etc., etc. And like when you get into the Gospels, like in the Gospel of Mark, you can track along high priestly imagery that's just kind of under the surface, so to speak, and it can explain a lot of the logic as to what's going on, if that makes sense.
Right.
Is that one of the reasons why you included Mark chapter 1 for the reading, the baptism of Jesus? Is there, would you say there's a tie to like the cleansing or washing, like certain things in the temple and then the cleansing of Jesus, more or less?
So Luke has to comment that he began his ministry at 30, right? So in the Torah,
Sure.
there's two ages, 25 and 30. And so it seems to be indicate, to me at least, that it's kind of like a priestly kind of context for his ministry. And so when you read the Gospel of Mark, in the Torah, in Numbers chapter 5, verse 2, hope I've got that right, what you see is 3 forms of impurity. And so basically, if someone has, like for instance, is a leper or has some kind of blood issue, or has been associated with someone who's died, they have to go outside of the camp, because this constitutes the 3 major forms of impurity. And what you see in the Gospel of Mark is basically in chapter 1, the Messiah is called the Holy One of God. And this is a very specific title. And there's only really one figure who's given that title, and that's Aaron. And so basically this title would connotate a high priestly context. And so what you then see, if you track along his miracles, is he deals with the 3 forms of impurity in sequence to what you see in Numbers chapter 5, verse 2. And so basically through dealing with these forms of impurity, he's really doing priestly work. He's bringing people back into the community, elevating their status, and making them whole again. But it's built on the idea of priestly concepts. And so, this type of appreciation can really affect your understanding of the Gospels and the epistles, and the entire logic as to why they're doing X, Y, and Z, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on.
So 17 to 27.
In the first month in the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was erected. Moses erected the tabernacle. He laid its bases and set up its frames and put in its poles and raised up its pillars. And he spread the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering of the tent over it, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He took the testimony and put it into the ark, and put the poles on the ark, and set the mercy seat above the ark, or above on the ark. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle and set up the veil of the screen, and screened the ark of the testimony, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He put the table in the tent of meeting on the north side of the tabernacle, outside the veil, and arranged the bread on it before the Lord.
Okay.
As the Lord, did I go over again?
No, keep going. Sorry.
Sorry.
I stopped.
And arranged the bread on it before the Lord, as the Lord had commanded Moses. he put the lampstand in the tent of meeting opposite the table on the south side of the tabernacle, and he set up the lamps before the Lord as the Lord had commanded Moses. He put the golden altar in the tent of meeting before the veil, and burned fragrant incense on it as the Lord had commanded Moses.
Okay, so the Torah here gives us a date, right? So the wilderness sanctuary is erected on the first day of the month. That is New Year's Day, corresponding to the first New Year's day of creation and date which the purified earth emerged from the waters of the deluge of the flood in Genesis 8:13. So if you compare the date with Genesis 8:13 to Exodus chapter 40 verse 17, what you'll see is this kind of correlation to a date. You know, why would the Torah use this specific date exactly? Well, basically, it's pointing you to the context of Genesis again, and the idea of the story of Noah. If you think about the story of Noah for a moment, what happened? Well, the waters came back together again, right? And this reverses day 2 of creation, where the waters are separated from each other. And so basically in the story of Noah, you got a recreation event where creation is brought to a close, and then you have a new creation, and then out comes Noah. If you notice also the ark itself, it's 3-tiered, just like the temple is 3-tiered. The ark rests on a mountain, just like what you see in the prophetic text with the temple being placed on a mountain. Noah, when he comes out, performs offerings, so he's in the role of a priest. If you note the Adamic language as well that's ascribed to Noah as well, he's told to be fruitful and multiply. Where have you come across that before? Well, you come across that with Adam. Adam's told to be fruitful and multiply. And so basically Noah is being set up as a new Adam in a restored, renewed creation. And when writers like Philo are talking about this, he just flat out says that for all intents and purposes, they understood Noah to be a new Adam, or the first man, to bring to mind the first man. And in the context of a second creation, he calls it. And so, you know, they're noting these spirals that the Most High had a true intention there in Genesis 1-3 with Adam. Adam failed. And so what the Most High then does, he tries to raise up these new Adams through various different figures. And Noah is really the first figure, and it begins the first spiral of this new Adam. And so through the erection of the tabernacle, linking it back to the story of the flood, and again, it would connotate the idea of new creation. When you raise up the new tabernacle, you're raising up a restored, renewed creation. And so really it links all the way back to even the story of the flood, and things like this. And if you think about it, right, if you take the Hebrew word for ark that's employed in the story of Noah, that Hebrew word is only used outside of the Genesis account with the story of Moses. In Exodus chapter 2, Moses is placed in an ark, but the Hebrew word there is actually the same Hebrew word that you see employed in the Genesis account for Noah's ark. And so there's little indications that Moses is being presented as a new Noah. And even like when he dies at 120. Where have we come across 120 years before? Well, in the story of Noah, right? So there's little indications in the text that that Moses is being presented in this kind of Noah type context, and with that comes the association of this new creation. Old creation dies, new creation is reborn, so to speak, and then you get the idea of temple associated with that. So, you know, the erection of the tabernacle has cosmic consequences and how it relates back to Genesis. Anyway, those are my comments.
Any other comments before we move on? Questions? Okay. Verse 28. He put in place the screen for the door of the tabernacle, and he set the altar of burnt offering at the entrance of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, and offered on it the burnt offering and the grain offering, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He set the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it for washing, with which Moses and Aaron and his sons washed their hands and their feet when they went into the tent of meeting, and when they approached the altar, they washed as the Lord commanded Moses. And he erected the court around the tabernacle and the altar, and set up the screen of the gate of the court. So Moses finished the work.
There we go. And we've got another allusion there to the Genesis account in chapter 2. When Moses finishes the work, again, Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, and God completes by the seventh day his work. So again, it's presenting Moshe in the context of the creator creation. And so this makes sense, if the tabernacle is associated with the deluge, the flood, and then it's also being associated with Genesis chapter 1, you get the idea of new creation coming into the picture. And so it really attests to the centrality of the temple again. So I'm just going to finish off with kind of like a rabbinic quote. And so this is how the temple is being viewed in the rabbinic material. Just as the navel is in the center of a person, so the land of Israel is the navel of the earth. As it is said, those who live at the navel of the earth, Ezekiel 38:12. The land of Israel sits in the center of the world, Jerusalem in the center of the land of Israel, the temple in the center of Jerusalem, the sanctuary in the center of the temple, the ark in the center of the sanctuary, and the foundation stone from which the world was formed sits in front of the sanctuary. So the idea there is that this is the focal point of all creation. When you look at the temple and the high priest, you're looking at creation, a restored, renewed creation. And from it emanates all fertility and stability. And so these kind of categories are being placed onto the Messiah, because obviously there are texts where he says that he associates the temple with his body, and he's placed in a high priestly context and so forth like this. And so we really have to think about, what do these texts actually mean to people living in the Second Temple period? How would they view these things? And so hopefully through the sources that I've gone through, Philo, Josephus, the rabbinic material and so forth, it gives you kind of an insight into how these things are actually being viewed. And so you can get into the heads of people living in the first century and make the type of associations that they would make. Anyway, but that finishes my comments.
I'll continue on a little bit. The glory of the Lord. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it. And the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys.
There we go. What do you want to do now? Do you want to just skip to Mark chapter 1, verse 9 to 28?
Yeah. Or are we touching Ezekiel?
We could do. It depends on you. It depends on the audience, because information overload.
I think we can do Ezekiel, for the sake of recording.
Okay, go for it.
Oh, I thought I had Ezekiel up, but I'm working off of a different Torah portion, I guess, and it did not give me that one. So let me pull that up here in a second. 45:16, right?
Yes, it's chapter 40, Ezekiel chapter 45, verse 16 to chapter 46, verse 18.
Oh, found it.
Okay.
Okay. So 45:16 says, all the people of the land shall be obliged to give this offering to the prince of Israel in Israel. It shall be the prince's duty to furnish the burnt offerings, grain offerings, and drink offerings at the feasts, the new moons, and the Sabbaths, all the appointed feasts of the house of Israel. He shall provide the sin offerings, grain offerings, burnt offerings, and peace offerings to make atonement on behalf of the house of Israel. Sorry. Thus says the Lord God, in the first month, on the first day of the month, you shall take a bull from the herd without blemish, and purify the sanctuary. The priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the doorsteps of the temple, the four corners of the ledge of the altar, and the posts of the gate of the inner court. You shall do the same on the seventh day of the month for anyone who has sinned through error or ignorance. So you shall make atonement for the temple. And the first month, on the 14th day of the month, you shall celebrate the feast of Passover. And for 7 days unleavened bread shall be eaten. On that day, the prince shall provide for himself and all the people of the land a young bull for a sin offering. And on the 7th days of the festival, he shall provide as a burnt offering to the Lord 7 young bulls and 7 rams without blemish. On each of the 7 days, and a male goat daily for a sin offering, and he shall provide a grain offering, an ephah for each bull, an ephah for each ram, and a hin of oil to each ephah. In the 7th month, on the 15th day of the month, and for the 7 days of the feast, he shall make the same provision for sin offerings, burnt offerings, and grain offerings, and for the oil. You want me to continue reading?
Sure.
The prince and the feast. So, chapter 46. Thus says the Lord God, the gate of the inner court that faces east shall be shut on the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath day it shall be opened, and on the day of the new moon it shall be opened. The prince shall enter by the vestibule of the gate from outside, and shall take his stand by the post of the gate. The priest shall offer his burnt offering and his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate. Then he shall go out. But the gate shall not be shut until evening. The people of the land shall bow down at the entrance of the gate before the Lord on the Sabbaths and on the new moons. The burnt offerings that the prince offers to the Lord on the Sabbath day shall be 6 lambs without blemish and a ram without blemish. And the grain offering with the ram shall be an ephah. And the grain offering with the lambs shall be as much as he is able, together with a hin of oil to each ephah. On the day of the new moon he shall offer a bull from the herd without blemish, and 6 lambs and a ram, which shall be without blemish. As a grain offering he shall provide an ephah with the bull, and an ephah with the ram, and with the lambs as much as he is able, together with a hin of oil to each ephah. When the prince enters, he shall enter by the vestibule of the gate, and he shall go out by the same way. When the people of the land come before the Lord at the appointed feast, he who enters by the north gate to worship shall go out by the south gate, and he who enters by the south gate shall go out by the north gate. No one shall return by the way of the gate by which he entered, but each shall go out straight ahead. When they enter, the prince shall enter with them, and when they go out, he shall go out. As at the feast in the appointed festivals, the grain offering with a young bull shall be an ephah, and with a ram an ephah, and with the lambs as much as one is able to give, together with a hin of oil to an ephah. When the prince provides a freewill offering, either a burnt offering or peace offerings as a free will offering to the Lord. The gate facing east shall be open for him, and he shall offer his burnt offering or his peace offerings as he does on the Sabbath day. Then he shall go out, and after he has gone out, the gate shall be shut. You shall provide a lamb a year old without blemish for a burnt offering to the Lord daily. Morning by morning you shall provide it. And you shall provide a grain offering with it morning by morning, 1/6 of an ephah, and 1/3 of a hin of oil to moisten the flour as a grain offering to the Lord. This is the perpetual statute. Thus the lamb and the meal offering and the oil shall be provided morning by morning for a regular burnt offering. Thus says the Lord God, if the prince makes a gift to any of his sons as an inheritance, it shall belong to his sons. It is their property by inheritance. But if he makes a gift out of his inheritance to one of his servants, it shall be his to the year of liberty. Then it shall revert to the prince. Surely it is his inheritance. It shall belong to his sons. The prince shall not take any of the inheritance of the people, thrusting them out of their property. He shall give his sons their inheritance out of his own property, so that none of my people shall be scattered from his property. Yes. Comments?
It's all on you, Dean.
I mean, these are pretty much narrative commandments.
So how would you approach this in relation to like faith in the Messiah? So obviously this is a temple context, and offerings are being performed. So how would you relate that to your view of faith in the Messiah? You're probably pondering away.
I'm pondering. Well, I'm trying to like connect the dot with the lamb. I'm not getting that.
Okay, I would say there's a more fundamental question here. Can faith in the Messiah abide side by side if one also performs actual offerings in the temple? And so one text I would point to is Acts chapter 21. In Acts chapter 21, beginning with verse 20, what you see is the Apostle Paul, and he's going to James or Yaakov and the elders, and they instruct him to take 4 men who have taken a vow and go to the temple and be purified with them and pay their expenses to demonstrate that he is still Torah observant and that he still teaches the Torah. And so for the apostles, I would say, and the elders, there was no conflict of faith in going to the temple and performing offerings whilst having faith in the Messiah, because Acts chapter 21 takes place way after the resurrection. You see the farewell speech of Paul in chapter 18, and so this is more like the tail end of his ministry rather than the beginning of his ministry. So this is many years in, and so even at that point, going to the temple and making offerings still posed no problem or contradiction with their faith, because the type of vow which the 4 men took would have been a Nazirite vow. They would have shaved their heads, and after the completion of the vow. And so when you read Numbers chapter 6, it actually has a very detailed set of commandments about what to offer and so forth like that, which would include like animal offerings, etc., etc. So this was a very expensive way to demonstrate that the Apostle Paul was obeying the Torah. And so, and again, it goes back to the issue of offerings. Can a person who has faith in the Messiah perform offerings at an actual temple? I would argue yes, because we have a concrete example in Acts chapter 21 of the of Yaakov or James and the elders sending Paul to the temple to perform such things. So I would say my position would be there's no conflict.
No, I would agree.
Well, that was a quick conversation. There we go. But yeah, so I mean, you got other aspects of like what's happening in Ezekiel, like the idea of 7, and again, 7 is very linked to creation and so forth, like this. So in Ezekiel itself, you got like texts like in Ezekiel 38, which talk about the center of the earth, or the navel of the earth, and so again, it's this idea of centrality. The temple. And priesthood, high priest, is going to be like the center of the universe, basically. But any other comments, thoughts, suggestions, insults?
We don't really get to see this much in the Gospels, though, do we?
See what exactly?
Most of the free will offerings, the offerings that it's happening in the temple.
Sure. I mean, you've got like in the Gospel of Matthew, like chapter 5, where you get in about what to do when you bring your offering, right? If you go and forgive your brother, be reconciled with your brother first, and then come and make your offering. Well, the underlying assumption there is that you're still going to be performing offerings, right? And so the idea is to get the intention correct. So there are texts which have kind of the context of the temple that seem to indicate that there's no conflict of interest when it comes to having faith in the Messiah and performing offerings, right? And so here's what I do. I would point to very concrete examples of this, right? So I just did in Acts chapter 21, where James and the elders have no problem whatsoever in sending people to the temple to complete a vow which would necessitate offerings being made. And so this isn't theory. This is actually concrete actions that they're performing. They're outworking their faith. And so, you know, I would point, granted that we don't have too many examples of this, but we do have examples of context where the underlying assumption is that you still could perform offerings.
So if we wanted to look at Ezekiel again, 40:13, you shall provide a lamb a year old without blemish for a burnt offering to the Lord daily. Could you make the connection that Jesus, the Messiah, is offering himself as the lamb, given the anointment of the oil as well?
As the Messiah is taken on a high priestly role, and as the high priest represents all of creation, I think it's perfectly reasonable then to associate animal imagery to the Messiah, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, that's what I'm trying to make the connection as, is that you have these imagery of the oil and the basically the sixth of an ephah of grain offering with the oil, and then given with the lamb. And we're associating with this with Jesus usually, but
here's another
the thing is the year old without blemish.
Yeah, here's another issue as well. We're mixing imagery, okay?
Right.
So when you're talking about the lamb, you've probably got a very specific kind of imagery associated with that, i.e., the Passover lamb, right? But the problem with that type of imagery is that when you actually look in the Torah, the Passover lamb is not specifically and directly called an atonement, right? It's not for sin, not explicitly and directly. Okay, so now you're associating kind of lamb imagery to atonement, and that would cause kind of a conflict in terms of Torah.
Okay.
And so you've really got to take a much more broader view of this. Okay, if the Messiah is the high priest and the high priest represents all of creation, then this simply transcends just a simple one-for-one association between the Messiah being a lamb and the Passover lamb, right? This now has implications for all of creation. And so basically you've got this combination of imagery now being tightly knit together, okay? And the logic behind that is, well, the high priest is a microcosm of all creation, and therefore he represents all of creation, including all of the animals and so forth like that. And so therefore it's a much more broader way to actually understand what's going on there. And it kind of accounts for this kind of different imagery when it comes to actual nitty-gritty details like atonement, right? Because technically, explicitly and directly, the Passover lamb is not for atonement, technically speaking, in an explicit sense.
But the high priest is. And in this case, Jesus, the Messiah, is the offering for atonement.
Yeah, I mean, you've got text like in Exodus chapter 28 where the high priest bears the sins of the people on his forehead, right? So you do have these types of texts where you've got the implication that the high priest can bear the actual sin of the people, and so obviously it would work in that kind of fashion that the Messiah, being the high priest, would then bear the sins of the people, and so it's the combination of imagery that's being combined together. And here's the thing, right? When it comes to imagery and if imagery conflicts or not, there are places in the Torah, in the Tanakh, where imagery can conflict, right? And maybe I'll give you a quick example of this just for the audience. If you go to Isaiah chapter 62, for instance, in Isaiah chapter 62, you're going to see very difficult imagery. So here we go. This is Isaiah chapter 62, verse 4 and 5. So this is talking about Zion, and Zion is imaged as a woman, as a mother, and she's one day going to be married. And so it says this: "You no longer shall be called forsaken, nor shall your land any longer be called desolate, but you shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land married. For Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh delights in you, and your land is married. For as a young man marries a virgin, so your sons marry you. And as a bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so your God shall rejoice over you." So here, it's talking about, so shall your sons marry you. Well, the implication here is that Zion is a mother, and her inhabitants are considered to be sons. But if you take that imagery of a mother marrying her sons, that would be flat out against the Torah, right? And so again, we have to appreciate that this type of imagery, it can be very conflictive. It can be a conflict at times, okay? But it's still permissible to use this type of imagery, even though it does conflict, if that makes sense. Maybe you're writing notes.
I'm writing notes.
Yep, there we go.
You said Isaiah 62.
Yep. If you're writing notes, you might as well begin from verse 1, so you can actually get the greater context of Zion and so forth like that. But verse 1 to verse 5. I just did 2 verses for brevity's sake.
Okay. Move on to, well, should we do Acts 20, 21, 24?
Can do if you want. Why not?
Yeah. I think that was the way that Austin wanted to proceed. So let's see. Acts 21:20. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the law. And they are informed of thee, that thou teachest all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after their customs. What is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that thou art come. Do therefore this that we say to thee. We have 4 men which have a vow on them. Take them, and purify thyself with them, and be at charges with them, and they may shave their heads, and all may know that those things, whereof they were informed concerning thee, are nothing, but that thou thyself also walkest orderly, and keepest the law. So reading that, is this still dealing with the Nazarite?
Yeah, so the implication there is that the 4 men who he takes with him would be partaking in the Nazarite vow, right? And
Right.
so if you go to Numbers chapter 6, it details what you have to do when you perform a Nazarite vow, including all of the offerings. And so the implicit implication there is that they would be performing offerings at the temple. And so this was a very expensive thing to do. And so this is a very expensive way to demonstrate that the rumors about the Apostle Paul are incorrect, they're false. He wasn't teaching against the Torah, and this is a very expensive way to demonstrate it. So there's 2 views when it comes to what Paul was doing himself. Now, one view says that he also participated in the Nazarite vow because he was to be purified with them. Or the second view is that because he had just come out of a foreign land, what you had to do was you had to basically be purified as you come back into the promised land, into sacred space. And so basically he's kind of traveling about, and he's outside of the land and he's inside of the land, and because he's come into the land, he then has to be purified. So there's 2 views about what it means by be purified with him, but what we can say is that the 4 men would have been participating in a Nazarite vow at the very least.
Then we can finish it up with Mark.
Yep, Mark, that'll do.
Okay, Mark. Let me pull him up. So Mark 1, verses 9 through 28. So we have the baptism of Jesus. In those days, Jesus came up from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased." Verse 12, the temptation of Jesus. The Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. And he was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. Now, after John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee, proclaiming the gospel of God, and saying, "The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel." Passing along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on a little farther, he saw James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, who were in their boat mending the nets. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed him. And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority, and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Jesus of Nazareth, have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying out with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all of the surrounding region of Galilee.
So here we've got this title, Holy One of God, in Mark 1:24. And so when we're thinking about this title in terms of the Tanakh, in the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, there's only really one precedent that we have for the singular, the Holy One of God, and that's Aaron. So, for instance, like in Psalms 106:16, Numbers 16:7, Aaron is called the Holy One of Vayakhel.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, then the function of this title, then it becomes high priestly. And when we look at the Torah again in Numbers chapter 5, verse 2, let me just check that. Let me just I believe it's Numbers 5:2. Yeah, Numbers chapter 5, verse 2, you get this. And Yod-Heh-Vav said to Moses, "Command the Israelites to send away from the camp anyone who has a defiling skin disease or a discharge of any kind, or is ceremonially unclean because of a dead body. Send away male and female alike, send them outside the camp, so that it will not defile their camp where I dwell among them." The Israelites did so. They sent them outside the camp. They did as Yod-Heh-Vav had instructed Moses. So there you got three types of impurity: defiling skin disease, discharge of any kind, or uncleanness because of a body. So defiling skin diseases like leprosy. And so in the same sequence, what you see in the Gospel of Mark is the Messiah heals a leper, Mark chapter 1, verse 40 to 45. And then he heals a woman with a 12-year flow of menstrual blood, so an issue of blood or an issue, Mark chapter 5, verse 24 to 34. Sorry, 25 to 34, and then he raises a young girl from the dead. So Mark chapter 5, verse 35 to 43. So basically what Mark is doing there is it's mimicking in sequence these three forms of impurity that you see in Numbers chapter 5, verse 2. And so basically it's building off of the idea that the Messiah is the high priest and is being associated with the high priest with this high priestly title, the Holy One of God. And so you've got this idea of like holiness that's transmitted from one to another. And you can see this principle of holiness being transmitted from one to the other in places like Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 19, for instance. So this is going to be talking about the priests, but notice what happens at the end. "And when they go forth into the outer court, even into the outer court to the people, they shall put off their garments in which they ministered and lay them in the chambers of the sanctuary. And they shall put on other garments, and they shall not sanctify the people with their garments." Right? So the idea is that if someone touches their garments, they're going to be transmitted this kind of holiness that's going to be associated with them. And so this principle of flow of holiness seems to be employed in the Gospels when it comes to the Messiah, because like people touch him and they suddenly become healed, right? So you've got this kind of transfer or transmission of holiness from one to another, and basically the premise for that is in the Tanakh itself. And so you got, for instance, in Mark chapter 6, verse 56, where it talks about they tried to get to the edge of his cloak, right, to touch the garment that he was wearing. And it's this idea of holiness being associated with the priesthood and garments and so forth like that. You can also see the principle of overhanging acts as well when the Apostle Peter, I think, is walking along and people are trying to get into his shadow, right, to be healed and so forth like this. So you've got this aspect of kind of transfer of holiness from one to another, like in the Gospels and in Acts, I would say. But that kind of finishes up my comments.
So they believe that the shadow is also a place where you can be healed?
Yeah, if you look in Acts.
Yeah. Kind of goes back to one of the architects, right? Of the tabernacle, where he's has a shadow, or is that
Yeah.
kind of like that person, and also how the cloud overhanging is where kind of like a
Yeah,
symbol of where God is.
I don't have too much to say like Bezalel about the meaning of his name and so forth like that. Some of the etymologies are a bit complex and tricky, but one thought did come to mind. If part of his name has to do with the shade, and so really the temple is the place of protection. It's really the
Mm-hmm.
you come into someone's shade under their roof, so to speak. And so maybe it kind of takes the idea of safety, divine type of safety, kind of like that, if that makes sense.
Could you say that the high priest holds the tabernacle within him?
I would say that he sums up all of creation. So it's not just simply a tabernacle, which is sort of, he represents all of creation. So
Everything.
This is much more broader. This is everything.
Yeah. I don't have any more comments, questions. I don't have any insults to throw at you. You do too much of a good job.
I think we're done. I think nearly like over 3 hours.
Anybody else have any questions, comments?
I have a
still
question.
There. Go ahead, Light.
So, yeah, you talked about, going back to healing and people being healed based upon like touching of the shadow or cloak or something like that. I don't know if you can verify or anything. I've heard it said once before. So, like when the woman with the issue of blood, she touched the fringe of his cloak, and where does that idea come from? Of where she could be healed from touching his cloak. I think it comes from like Malachi. There's healing in his wings. In that or something. I honestly don't know. I don't know Hebrew. I don't know if there's any validity to that or not, or if you heard anything similar.
Yeah. So obviously you're going to be dealing with the Greek, right, in the Gospels. So I've forgotten what the Greek term is, but the Greek term employed for the fringe of the garment there is the exact Greek term that you see employed for the tassels in the Torah, in the Septuagint.
Oh, interesting.
And so when it comes to this idea of touching the garment, there is some scholarship who would say that you've got kind of a Zechariah type of context. And so basically it's trying to connotate the idea of this kind of eschatological age that's coming through obviously the touching of, as you said, as you mentioned it, the healing in the wings, right? And so some would point to kind of like context in Zechariah, healing wings. I'm just trying to find, Malachi. So I mean that's one potential, but I'm sure there was a Zechariah kind of verse that people point to, but off the top I can't quite remember what's going on there. But maybe it'll come back to me one day. I don't know. But Malachi 4:2 is one that they do point to. So it could be very possible that they're thinking about that type of text, and then they're kind of associating it with this issue of holiness, of like transfer of holiness that you see like in Ezekiel and things like that.
Sure.
Any other comments, suggestions, opinions, or insults?
I think we got it all.
Well, there we go. I think that's a successful day.
A day it was.
There we go.
Okay, so I think we'll just kind of linger around here, just give some little chit chat.
Okay.
Unless you want to head out. I think I want to take my headset off and just kind of relax a little bit now.
Yeah, information to digest it.
Yeah, quite the reading. Lots of numbers.
Okay, have fun on that.
Okay. Thank you, Naz, by the way.